Good afternoon, everybody.
Hello.
Sorry to be a couple of moments late. I was having a challenge getting online.
Hello.
So I'm going to go ahead and do a roll call of our board members so that we can make sure everybody is audible. Dr. Anderson?
Present. There's some feedback in the background, however.
So those people who are not speaking, please mute, but be ready to take it off mute to respond. Ms. Cohen?
Here.
Ms. Derenak Kofax?
Here.
Mr. Frisch? Mr. Frisch, we can't hear you. We can see you. Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
Here.
Ms. Marin?
Here.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Here.
Ms. Omesh? Ms. Omesh, I can see you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I said here. Sorry. Can you hear me?
Now I can. Thank you. Ms. Pekarsky?
I'm here.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
I'm here.
Ms. Tolan?
I'm here too.
Great. And I know we have a number of presenters, so I'm going to also call upon them just to make sure everybody's here. Dr. Duran?
Present.
And Dr. Presidio?
Here.
Mr. Plattenberg?
It's actually Mr. Smith today. Mr. Plattenberg is unable to attend.
Okay. Thank you for being here. Ms. Troughton?
Yes, I'm here.
We have technical difficulties with Ms. Troughton, so she's actually on my cell phone, and when she speaks, I will put her phone to the speaker.
IT is working with her right now.
Wonderful, thank you. Ms. Stack?
I'm here.
Okay. Mr. Morris? Principal Morris, are you on the phone?
He's not currently on the phone. He will be here for answering questions. He's not presenting, but I don't see him on the list yet.
Okay, and Mr. Principal Urbrecht?
Present, thank you.
And Principal Pilson?
I'm present, thank you.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. We're glad you're all here virtually. I'm now going to hand the schedule or the presentation over to Dr. Duran, who will do a brief introduction, and then I believe Dr. Presidio will be presenting. Dr. Duran?
Dr. Brabrand would like to open first, and then he'll hand it to me. Thank you.
Oh, okay. That was different than what you said earlier. So we're glad you're here, Dr. Brabrand.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone had a wonderful Mother's Day weekend. I am very excited to bring this presentation to you today as we look at considerations for graduation, considerations for summer school, and considerations for the fall. Our staff's been very hard at work around the clock and the weekends, including Mother's Day, honestly, to get ready for this. And really, here's the goal today. We do need to make decisions around graduation and summer school so that we're ready to effectively implement those recommendations to our communities. They're waiting patiently, but I understand the need for them to understand what we are going to do around graduation and summer school. You all asked for engagement and options. We provided options today, and I am asking the superintendent for consensus for me to move forward around graduation and around summer school. We also, though, want to begin the conversation about return to school in the fall and what the scenarios will look like. And Dr. Duran and Dr. Presidio will show you the context of all the stakeholdering we have done and that we will continue to do. This is a very high-level framework, more detailed, honestly, than anything we've gotten from the state yet at this point. We're hopeful for more information from the state in the weeks ahead to really pin down all of the details, because as detailed as this presentation is, there are still going to be some questions to answer. We'll want your feedback on our approach to the fall. And I want you to know that we've started to even do cost estimates that fall within the budgets that we have presented to you with both COVID reserve and our CARES one-time funding. So today, a decision around graduation and a decision around summer school, and beginning to shape and get your feedback around how we're looking at the fall in terms of scenarios and the budget priorities to make that reopening successful. So I want to again introduce Dr. Duran and Dr. Presidio and the whole host of team members under them who have worked under them and with them to make this presentation a reality today. Dr. Duran.
Actually, Dr. Brabrand, I apologize. I had promised my colleagues, because of the significant amount of paper that they received just a short time ago, and knowing how important this conversation is, I do want to do just take a poll of the board as to whether or not we should delay the AAP presentation today and bring it back later in the month, or if we want to try to get through both presentations and have that conversation, knowing that we have people that have tight deadlines. So if I can get a show of hands from my colleagues as to who can support just holding off on the AAP presentation till the end of the month. So I have Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Derenak Kofax, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Omesh, Mr. Frisch, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Tolan, Ms. Marin, and I'm going to add my name to that list. Those who are against doing that, please show hands. I have Ms. Keys-Gamarra and Dr. Anderson. I think with that, we are going to delay the AAP until later in the month because of the significance of trying to get through this presentation and it being 47 pages. Okay, Dr. Duran.
Thank you, Chair Corbett Sanders. If someone can please bring up the PowerPoint presentation for me to the screen. And while we're waiting for that, we'd like to just acknowledge and thank, as Dr. Brabrand did, there were so many individuals who helped to put this together, many different work groups. And so we're really excited that this is the first conversation and there'll be many more that will need to happen. So the outcomes of today's work session, there are 4 key outcomes. One, we want to begin with reviewing some of the key considerations that have impacted our decisions on reopening schools, and you'll hear from that information from the health department. Lorraine Troughton will be providing some information on that and other documents that we reviewed. The second key outcome, as Dr. Brabrand said, is develop consensus on recommendations for the 2020 graduation ceremonies. Number 3 is to get board consensus on summer programming so that we are clear on what we can to support continuity of learning for all students and what targeted intervention services that will happen during the summer. Very critical for us to get that consensus today so that we can move forward with making sure that we have the proper HR, staffing, as well as registration for parents. And fourth outcome of today is just to begin considerations for fall learning through scenarios, not options, but scenarios to address student learning loss and social emotional needs. Much more we don't know, and so what we do know, we put together some scenarios. Again, there have been many, many working groups that's worked on this. We've had our extension of the school year work group, which I have chaired, instruction work group, which Dr. Presidio has chaired. Ms. Johnson has chaired one on student services, and also we have some graduation ceremony that was chaired by Dr. Ivy. Many department staff and our principal associations were also key in this. We did ask for some initial stakeholder feedback, and I really want to thank our teacher associations who really stepped up and did some amazing outreach to their members and provided us with a lot of quality input. We did attach all of their recommendations to this presentation so you can review that. I'll be sharing with you some of the themes from that. Our principal associations did the same thing and provided us some feedback. Those are also attached. I want to thank our PTA. They did the same thing and provided us some feedback. Ms. Johnson met with the ACD and SEPTA and they provided her some feedback. And there's also a document attached for that for your review. While we acknowledge that there was a lot of robust stakeholder engagement in this process, we are also cognizant that it was just the tip of the iceberg and we need to do more. And so we're draft planning right now. How do we better collaborate with all of our stakeholder groups? Like I said, we did receive some information, but we are going to need to provide more ongoing and authentic engagement, particularly for our parents and community, so that they are a part of this process moving forward, particularly with the fall recommendations. So we've had some, but we're acknowledging we need to do more and we need to develop a plan out better to engage everyone. Having said that, here are some of the key themes from stakeholder groups that I just mentioned. And again, the documents you have their full reports around, particularly in this slide, summer programming. And one major theme we saw across all the groups is to avoid face-to-face summer programming. One, to allow downtime for staff and students to focus on personal and family wellness, and also concerns about safety. The second is expanding online campus offerings and optional continuity of learning resources so that students can self-pace themselves for additional learning that they may like to have. Continue to provide resources to help students engage in digital learning and help with those skills around internet safety and data privacy. We heard a lot of feedback, particularly from parents and our teacher associations, around making sure that we're partnering around child health and social services, both for short and long-term needs. And really making sure we heard loud and clear from our teacher associations to make sure we're providing professional learning opportunities as they're working to meet new expectations. And starting in the fall, what that might look like, we want to make sure we're best preparing them. Returning to the school year, some feedback, strong communication plans and consistent expectations across schools. We heard that from our parents in particular. Universal access to technology for making sure all students have that, whether it's devices or internet service. Really ensuring systematic support models in place so that we're looking not only at the instructional aspect of what's going to happen or may happen, but also the behavioral and wellness needs. And we heard a lot of feedback, and you'll see it in the reports, around additional clinical staffing that parents and teachers and principals felt was needed. There was a lot of good discussion about how to make sure we differentiate distance learning models by students' developmental level and their needs. In other words, not a one-size-fits-all, really considering the whole picture. And last, from our teacher associations in particular, real concern to make sure that policies are put in place to support staff who may have health or personal issues that would prevent them from returning to work if we do have a face-to-face comeback in the fall, even if it's at a hybrid approach, that there may be staff who need to be supported, and wanting to make sure we have such policies in place for that. So thinking that that's just some of the key themes, but I encourage you to look at all of the input we received. It was very, very comprehensive. And I know, again, as I said earlier, we'll need to receive more. So thinking about that and taking their feedback into place, there were some key considerations beyond the feedback and input we received that have impacted our decisions and what you'll hear from us in the presentation today. We have a state-level COVID-19 education task force that is currently continuing to develop, and they will be issuing policy guidance to us. They have been issuing some, and the state superintendent meets with all superintendents weekly. But this task force has been put in place to provide a comprehensive set of recommendations that we anticipate will be in early June. I saw some of the board members and some public had also shared with us the Maryland plan that was submitted by their state superintendent. So this is supposed to be similar to that, and we're awaiting guidance from them on reopening scenarios and what can happen there. So that's to come. We also have the use of CARES Act funding, and we've received a lot of information. And as you know, we have $20.8 million that can be used to help assist with that. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Lorraine Troughton, who's going to talk to you about some of the health and safety considerations. And Lorraine has been an amazing partner in these work group meetings. We've also, her and I, along with Marty Smith, have met every Friday with our health department counterparts, and they have been very instrumental in giving us advice, opinions, and being able to brainstorm with them on some of what you'll hear from us today. So Lorraine Troughton, I will please take over from here. Thank you.
much, Dr. Duran, and I'm happy to provide the information. As Dr. Duran said, we've worked very, very closely with the health department, and I'd like to do a situation report. I think it's important for us to understand the number of cases that have increased just since Thursday. So our Thursday numbers, we're currently over 5,000 cases. This morning, we are at 6282. So that's a significant jump in the number of cases that we are seeing just in a few days. We were experiencing 200 to 250 new cases of COVID per day. Our numbers for today are 309. Our hospitalizations were at 800, and we are at 962 today, with deaths exceeding 200, and our numbers for today are 250. Because the schools are closed, the focus for the health department, as well as around the country, are focused on high-risk facilities and specific areas of the county. Examples for the high-risk facilities include nursing homes and detention centers, and specific areas of the county, specifically for our area, would be our Hispanic community. The cases by ethnicity show our Hispanic community at 59.5%. All of these numbers are pulled from the Fairfax County Health Department dashboard. So there is a 20% of the data is missing simply because the data is coming in continually. So as you can see, Fairfax County is very far from achieving any level of immunity at this point. Next slide. Okay, thank you. The boxing it in approach is an approach that has been referred to during briefings that we have all been watching and hearing about. It is a model that Dr. Tom Frieden has provided. And if you visualize a box, there are 4 pieces of that box: test, isolate, find, and quarantine. And on the slides that you can see, I've just combined the testing and the finding and the isolation and the quarantine, because I think it's important that we all understand that a big piece of this is the health department is increasing their workforce and their contact tracing to allow us to test, isolate, find, quarantine, et cetera. So they're working very hard on that from that perspective. There are key points that continue to be something that we have to look at as we move forward, is that the infection rate is continuing to increase. As we relax the restrictions, the case numbers will increase, but we may be able to balance that out by the use of the boxing it in approach. The UVA model, which is specific to Virginia, is the model that the health department is using, and that model continues to suggest an increase in cases over the summer. That's important for us to acknowledge, because we do hear, oh, when it gets more humid and warmer, the virus will, quote unquote, go away. It will not be going away, because what we're seeing that the virus is currently spreading in regions that have those kinds of climate. So that's a significant piece of information as well. But to wrap it up, there just cannot be any assumptions made about the behavior of this virus. We have to be consistent in our approach. We have to use data. We have to watch the trends. And we have to continue to follow the recommendations of the health department and the CDC. At this point, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Marty Smith.
Thank you very much, Ms. Troughton. And to continue with those health and safety considerations, we need to think about the heightened sanitation and health procedures that we would have to encounter. Of course, ensuring that we had PPE or personal protective equipment for all of our employees and our students, and following those health guidelines from the health department, knowing the kinds of interactions that students and staff would have with one another. The recommendation is that we would have cloth masks versus the surgical grade mask. And with that, and looking at the cost for masks, those touchless thermometers, we would be looking at about $1.6 million in cost. Some additional costs would be focused on deep cleaning within our schools, and that would be taken care of by our day staff, our day custodial staff, with a cost of about $3.4 million for overtime. It's important to note that without knowing how long we would be engaged in deep cleaning, this is just a 6-month cost. Additionally, we'd look at ordering more cleaning supplies for our staff at a cost of $6 million. That's both for schools and buses. And in order to support us with our health efforts moving forward, we would see an increase in public health nurses of 5 positions at a cost of $0.6 million. To move on to the next slide, as we think about some of our facilities considerations, we have an example here that shows a picture of a current classroom at Sangster Elementary School, and then a picture of a classroom of what it would look like once we engage in social distancing practices. On the before side, you'll note that we could have up to 28 students in a classroom. On the after side, you'll note that we could accommodate on average 12 students in a classroom with the addition of the adults who would support instruction. That having these numbers in mind, we should think about what our models will be for coming back to school. And given our ability to provide space for students in the classroom, we might want to consider looking at a third of our students coming back for full day instruction at a time. And of course, we'll talk about that a little bit further in our presentation as we look at the possible hybrid models for returning to school. Another issue for us to consider is that of transportation. And much like the classroom situation where we would engage in social distancing, we'd also have to engage in social distancing on our buses. So you can see with that first bullet that we have currently approximately 1,200 buses used for daily routes throughout the year. And you can see the numbers of students who can fit on our full-size buses, as well as the numbers of students that we seat within each of those seats. Our elementary students, 3 per seat, and our middle and high school students, 2 per seat. If we would engage in that social distancing and those guidelines as recommended, we would lose about half the capacity on our buses for our middle and high school students with 1 student per seat, and we'd lose about 67% of the capacity for our elementary students with 1 student per seat. This bullet here requiring that increase of 779 buses, that would only be if we would make no adjustments to our current schedule. Again, we'll be talking about what those possible changes to the schedule could look like and what that hybrid approach could be. We'd also know that we need to have additional time built into our bus schedules to allow for cleaning. We'd need that PPE for drivers and attendants. And of course, the previous costs did include that PPE for drivers and attendants. There have also been some questions about perhaps increasing our walk to school distances to lessen the reliance of students on using our transportation, which would again be a consideration as we think about those schedules moving down the road. And as we did with the classrooms, we just wanted to provide you with what that look down the aisle for a big bus and that look down the aisle of one of our small buses. And again, it just reiterates that we would have 1 student per seat versus the 2 per seat that we have at middle and high school and the 3 per seat that we could possibly have at the elementary school. This next slide talks about technology considerations as we think about returning to school. Of course, we're engaged with the Superintendent's Technology Advisory Committee and are talking about our current infrastructure and our operational needs with that group, and are certainly looking forward to recommendations that we might have to put in place to improve and enhance our current infrastructure. So costs for any technology plan upgrades are currently to be determined, and we'll be providing the board an update once we get those costs. We also want to ensure that we provide every student access to an instructionally appropriate one-to-one device and ensure that they have connectivity at home. And expanding that to elementary school with our current inventory of computers and trying to get computers out as quickly as possible, we would have to purchase or lease another 18,000 computers to ensure that our elementary students had access to technology at a cost of about $2.5 million annually for 4 years. We also note that in order to ensure that our students had access to MiFis, an additional 2,000 MiFis would cost approximately $1 million. And those would be recurring costs because not only do we have to purchase the device, we have to purchase the service for those devices ongoing. We also will need to evaluate our current digital curriculum and those tools. Dr. Presidio will be talking about that a little bit further in the presentation. That's at a cost of $2.6 million. And lastly, we would want to enhance our school-based technology support by ensuring that all of our elementary schools would have a full-time SBIDS. And of course, in supporting the technology needs of our schools, those schools that have greater than 750 students would also receive a full-time T-spec at a cost of $4.5 million. We know that there have been questions about providing that full-time T-spec support for all of our remaining schools, and to do that would cost an additional $6 million. We don't have that on the slide, but I did want to give that as a bit of background. And with that, I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Dr. Duran to focus on PD.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. And board members, you're hearing a lot of budget information and various slides. At the end of the presentation, we'll pull all of our budget considerations into one slide so that you can see the big picture. Another key component as we thought about considerations, again, this is all prior to what you're going to hear from what the scenarios might look like. And a lot of this, again, came from feedback from our teacher associations and our principal associations in particular, that we need to be cognizant that any changes to instruction needs to make sure we're matching that with support that staff need to be prepared with those changes. And so there are three considerations that are really important moving forward, that we make sure that we prioritize the PD that we are doing for our teachers and administrators to support those changes, whether it's supporting instruction or how we're supporting students with social, emotional, and blended learning opportunities. Secondly, that we would need to update our division's professional development plan and to make sure that this is the priority. We have a lot of amazing professional development that's planned during the summer and also during August before school starts. But with these changes, we're going to need to prioritize and make some revisions to that. And we won't be able to necessarily do all of the professional development we've normally done. This has got to be our priority. And in doing that, that considers the last bullet here, which is to consider potential calendar adjustments to provide professional development days where students can engage in self-paced learning at home and teachers are participating in professional development to help them through this process. Our teachers have done an amazing job in this distance learning switch that we had to do very quickly. And now that we have time to plan for it, we need to be more thoughtful of what we can do to even help them do a better job. They've been working very hard with what we've been asking, and they've been doing amazing things, but hearing from them through the input that we got from their associations and from principals is they need more, and we need to make sure we provide them with what's needed moving forward. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Ivy, who has, as I said a moment ago, chaired a work group that looked at graduation ceremonies, and I'll turn over her for the next few slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Duran, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. We would like to share with you our recommendations for graduation for the class of 2020. We empathize with the disappointment and disruption that the COVID-19 pandemic and the subsequent school closure has placed on our senior class. And we are truly committed to celebrating our seniors in the safest and most personalized way possible. We understand that the senior class and community are anxiously awaiting a decision on celebrating our seniors, and we first want to share our recommendations with the board. Joining in this meeting today are three principals who have worked on the work group for graduation, and they are Daniel Smith,
Dr. Ivy, your mic went off. If you can, we're not able to hear you.
Okay, thank you. There are several factors and considerations in developing these plans. They included monitoring the facts, the data, and the science for conditions in our area, gaining input from students, parents, and staff, and providing the very best graduation experience that we are able to do without putting students and their families and our staff at risk. Input from senior students and parents was sought in a variety of ways. First, individual high school principals engaged their seniors and their parents through surveys and meetings. Next, we sought input from the seniors on the Superintendent Student Advisory Committee. And finally, a superintendent survey on graduation preferences was developed based on feedback from those initial conversations and feedback. The superintendent survey asked seniors and parents to indicate their preferences to 3 graduation options to celebrate the class of 2020. We shared that when expressing a preference in a response to one option on the survey, it did not mean the options in other questions would not be considered. The 3 options on the survey were face-to-face graduation rescheduled at a time when it was safe, and we asked them to rank their preferences, fall, winter, or spring. Virtual class of 2020 celebration video for the class, which would recognize each senior along with highlights of the senior year and messages from the principal and staff. And thirdly, an individual graduate photo recognition opportunity where seniors dressed in their cap and gown, accompanied with up to 2 family members, could come to the school for an informal photo opportunity. They could also pick up their diploma at that time, adhering to all social distancing guidelines and protocols. We also asked seniors and parents to provide additional suggestions and comments. The survey was emailed to all seniors and parents in the class. We had a 34% return rate for seniors and 42% return rate for parents. This slide shows the results for the face-to-face option. Overall, a face-to-face graduation in the fall was ranked as the best choice by 60% of students and 40% of parents. 18% of students and 24% of parents identified graduation at winter break as their second choice. 74% of the senior class did not want the option of not holding a face-to-face graduation, and 1/4 of their parents identified not holding a face-to-face graduation as their first choice. A majority of both students and parents like the idea of a class of 2020 celebration video, and a larger percentage of parents and students like the individual graduate photo opportunity. Students and parents were asked to give additional comments and suggestions in the superintendent's survey, and amongst those most commonly provided were holding a face-to-face graduation in the summer, staggering graduations for smaller groups of students practicing social distancing, holding car parades at the school or down a main thoroughfare in the neighborhood, making sure that we consider the importance of having all graduation associated regalia in the photo opportunity at the school, to reconsider the cost of senior dues to support graduation events that are no longer happening, to consider providing early dates and time in June for military connected parents and students because of summer orders, and using an equity lens to ensure that any celebration we decide includes all students, those with disabilities, those that are not active or that don't participate in a lot of activities and sports teams, and being sure that we are very considerate to students who may be experiencing financial difficulties. So due to the facts, the data, and the science from the health department, which show that Fairfax is far from immunity and that our infection rates are continuing to increase, and the UVA model predicts increased cases during this summer, and erring on the side of health and safety, we recommend 2 ways to celebrate the class of 2020 in June and early July. A virtual class of 2020 celebration video highlighting all students in the senior class and highlights of the year, and offering each senior and 2 members of their family an individual photo opportunity at the school in their cap and gown where they can pick up their diploma. We certainly understand the interest and overwhelming sentiment to have a face-to-face graduation ceremony. We cannot offer this opportunity in the summer due to the health risks that have already been identified. We will continue to monitor health conditions and guidelines in the fall, and if at all possible, to gather safely in large groups at that time. We will plan to offer a face-to-face graduation ceremony at each of our high schools during the fall months. A final decision about fall ceremonies will be announced around Labor Day. If a fall face-to-face ceremony cannot be held for health and safety reasons, then no in-person ceremonies will be scheduled. The winter brings additional risk of regular flu plus COVID-19. The ceremonies would have to be indoors, which brings additional risks with social distancing guidelines. The class of 2020 deserves appropriate closure to their time with FCPS. The individual photo opportunity, the celebration video, and the possibility of a face-to-face ceremony in the fall are the best options we can offer considering these unprecedented circumstances.
Thank you, Dr. Ivy. And now we will to Dr. Presidio, who will be walking us through our thinking around summer. And again, very important. Again, this is the part we need a board consensus at the end on how to best move forward. And then that will be followed up with some of the discussions around the scenarios for the fall. So thank you, Dr. Ivy, and I'll turn it over to Dr. Presidio.
So Dr. Duran, I do want the board to know that what we will do as far as our discussion of the briefing is we will chunk our discussion into the 3 areas. Graduation, we'll talk about that, and then we'll have a separate discussion on summer programs, and then the fall is the 3rd portion of our discussion. So when you're planning on your comments this afternoon, please think about it along the 3 sections that Dr. Duran has laid out in this presentation.
Thank you, Chair Corbett Sanders. Dr. Presidio.
All right, good afternoon, and thank you, Dr. Duran. We're going to turn now to looking at summer programs. And we'd like to start out actually by reviewing some of the considerations and the key issues that are at play as we're actually developing our summer plans. And the first is just a reminder that we do have that guidance from the state to not use our school buildings in July. And we also have the additional uncertainty of whether or not our facilities would be available in August. And even with social distancing requirements in place, if we were able to use our buildings in August, it's also important to remember that teachers actually return on their new contract on August 14th. So there's really a very limited period, even during the month of August, where we could offer any in-school summer programs. Similar to graduation, we do need to make some decisions very soon, hopefully today, regarding our summer programs so that we can start the appropriate planning processes and communication with students and families. And we, of course, are still addressing our technology issues, access and connectivity requirements that a number of our students need support with. And these last 2 bullet points are really important because in conversation with our associations, the leadership team and our principal associations really strongly urge the board to prioritize our CARES Act funding on school year interventions where we feel like we can really optimize and maximize the input of those interventions, and to focus that during the fall as opposed to during the summer. And then lastly, our teacher associations have expressed a lot of concern about the social emotional state of our families and teachers, and the need really for folks to have some break between fourth quarter of the summer and the start of the new school year. So to really consider making sure that all of our employees have an opportunity to have some break during the summer before we come back with a lot of additional student needs that are going to need to be met in the fall. So really for all of these reasons, the recommendations that you're going to see today are that we offer only virtual programs this summer. So not any in-school or face-to-face programs, but only recommendations regarding virtual programs for summer offerings. So more specifically, on this slide, you see that we're planning to suspend all of our in-school summer programs. The programs that you see here are programs that are really optional enrichment programs. They're not programs that lend themselves to a virtual format because they do require unique materials or supplies, equipment, in some instances like our CTE programs, or unique instructional approaches. So unfortunately, we're going to need to suspend the programs that you see listed here for summer 2020. However, we are recommending a number of important summer programs that we could offer in a virtual setting. And the first group of these programs is under special education, extended school year, and preschool autism classes. So I want to take a minute to unpack these charts with you because there's a lot of information here. And the first program that we're looking at is extended school year for special education students. And you see that there are two different scenarios. The first scenario on the top row is a scenario for a virtual model that would occur during essentially the month of July, late June into July. And it would serve about 3,500 students. There would be direct services and instructional materials like packets that would continue to be developed. You can see on the timeline that we really need to finalize our decisions about this approach this week so that we can begin the communication to stakeholders, the hiring process, the work that we need to do on IEP addendums, and actually get that program up and running at the end of the month of June. We think there's a lot of assets to this program. I mean, one, it's similar to what we've done in distance learning. So our families and students will have some familiarity with the online tools and the programming in this format. It's safer than trying to run a program in school, particularly for vulnerable students or staff. And it could remain open even if we had closures that needed to move us back into a social distancing format. It does, of course, have some associated challenges with it. Mostly, and most importantly, it doesn't really replicate what we can do during an in-school program. And we do have some of those technology access and support issues that we still need to address. I think the good news is the budget impact. There really is no budget impact because we already have funds budgeted to provide this program, as I said, to about 3,500 students. So that's scenario one, and it has a red box around it because that indicates that this is the staff recommendation to the board, is that we have a virtual summer model for extended school year. We are providing another scenario as an option to the board, and this would be for an in-school model. Now, we have to pause there, of course, and understand that we currently have guidance from the state not to run a program during the month of July. So that leaves us with about a 2-week period in August, potentially. We don't even know if we could run a program in our schools in August, but the best case scenario would be a 2-week period in August where we would provide services in schools for about 15 to 20 hours per week. The timeline is similar. The assets, of course, is that we would be able to provide support in face-to-face instruction, which is the best method for providing instruction. We'd have the ability to provide food services. Of course, the challenges, in addition to those that I just discussed with not even knowing about building access availability, would be social distancing would be incredibly difficult. That would be our first attempt at social distancing, making sure that we had the personal protective equipment, making sure that our cleaning measures were in place, and there would be a lot of time and effort and expense involved in setting all of that up. So there are cost increases with that model based on the additional staff and transportation costs under a social distancing model. And as I said, the personal protective equipment. So we are recommending a virtual model for extended school year. Similarly, our preschool autism classrooms, we're providing two different scenarios. And again, we're recommending scenario one, which would be a virtual model. And this would occur during July. Again, a direct services model to students with parent coaching sessions available and instructional materials available. The timeline is very similar. We do need to make decisions regarding which approach we're taking this week. And again, some of the assets and challenges are similar to those that we discussed with extended school year. You'll note that under scenario one, there is a slight cost increase for some of the printing and mailing of materials that we would need to do, but that would be offset by cost savings reductions, which would be very helpful to the overall budget scenario. Scenario two, again, is an in-school model to occur during those first 2 weeks in August of about 5 hours per day. And here you do see that there would be those cost increases, again, similar to what we discussed with extended school year. So we're not recommending option two or scenario two here because of the building use issues and the cost issues associated with that in-school model. So we're recommending for both ESY and PAC to do a virtual model this summer. So next we'll take a look at some of the division-wide learning opportunities at the various levels. And I'm going to start out by sharing some information with respect to high school. And the high school model is really an expanded credit recovery model that would be delivered in a virtual setting. And typically what we do in our credit recovery model when we run it in an in-person format is to just have that offered at a few select sites around the county. Doing that program virtually would give us the opportunity and the ability to have staff from every one of our high schools be able to provide support to the students from their own schools in a virtual format. And we think that that would be a significant benefit. We would run that program in July. It would be free to students. And again, it would be focused on kind of two sets of students. The first set would be students who had failed courses during school year 1920 that need to make that credit up. And the second group of students would be students that had been identified by their teachers, even though they had passed the class, as needing to shore up some of the essential knowledge and skills in a particular course, and they would be able to receive some targeted intervention support to make sure that they're on track for when we start school in the fall for the next series of courses and levels of courses that they would be taking. We already have curriculum, digital curriculum, the Edmentum software that would support this approach. On the asset side, this approach was strongly favored by our High School Principals Association, again, largely because of that connection with the base school. We already have the content ready to go, and for the fact that we could invite students into the program that had not necessarily failed the class, but just need some additional support. Challenges, of course, it's not the same as in-school instruction, and we don't have the Edmentum software that we need for English 9 and English 10 students who are English language learners. So we'll have to develop that separately, but we can do that in the ESOL office. Again, good news here on the budget side. We do have funds already budgeted for a credit recovery program, and we could use those funds to fund this program. And our budget is looking at funding essentially a cost estimate based on all of the students who participated across the school division last year, plus an additional 20% of students that we think might need that additional intervention and support. So we do have the budget to be able to provide enhanced enrollment or expanded enrollment in this virtual credit recovery intervention model. Also at the high school, there's a couple other options that we're making available to students. The first is online campus, and we would be expanding our sections of online campus courses based on student enrollment interest. And online campus provides students the opportunity to earn new credit. Additionally, we have an ESOL program that we offer through online campus that is very successful in supporting students with both English language development and core academics. This program would run during the month of July, and it is funded through student tuition. So on the budget side, at the end of this chart, you see there's no budget impact because it is funded by student tuition, but it's very important to point out that that tuition rate is prorated for students based on their FRM status. So there's a significant student discount for students who qualify economically for that support. And our ESOL program is also funded through a Title III grant. So there's no budget impact to this program. And we think that increasing the access and opportunities for enrollment in this program will provide students with a lot of opportunities to earn some new credit during the summer. And just as a reminder, we've already enrolled students in some of the self-directed online campus classes like economics and personal finance. And we have students that are already taking coursework currently during fourth quarter through online campus for some of those purposes. The last program that you see for high school is called our Continuity of Learning program. And this would be an optional program, and it would be for all of our students who choose to participate in Fairfax County at the high school level. It would be similar to what we're doing during distance learning in that students would be self-directed. They would be receiving materials, both print and digital materials, to support their literacy and their math development. And they would have opportunity to have some limited teacher office hours for support, and it would be free to all of our students. And we think this program would be particularly important to make sure that students are prepared for the next series of courses at the subsequent grade levels in both math and literacy. There's no budget impact, which again is good because we can cover this program through existing operating funds. So those are our programs that we're recommending for high school during the summer. At the middle school and the elementary school level, there are two different options that we're providing for board consideration. And again, we're hoping to get consensus on a decision today. The first option is continuity of learning, and it's essentially what I just described at the high school level, but happening at the middle school and the elementary school levels. So again, student access to self-directed learning materials with a focus on literacy and math, teacher office hours available on a limited basis for support. And this approach has been strongly recommended again by our principals associations at the elementary and the middle school level because it would be open to all students. It would support continuity of learning in those important subject areas. And it provides those opportunities for students to both review content from fourth quarter and to have some enrichment opportunities. And it will preserve, as you see, a lot of our budget to be focused on interventions that would need to occur during the school year. So you see there's no budget impact because we can cover the costs with operating funds, and it would allow us to move funds needed for intervention into next school year. The second option that you can see would be a virtual program. We're still recommending a virtual program that every one of our elementary and middle school sites would offer. There would be about 15 days of instruction. It would still be free to students, and students would be able to receive support from teachers at their individual schools. The biggest issue and challenge here, as you see, is the budget impact. So if you notice at the elementary school level, running a program with that level of teacher support just for select students, one class per grade level at every school, would cost $7 million. At the middle school, it would cost almost $1 million. So there are significant budgetary costs with trying to run a program of that nature during the summer, which is why we feel that it would be more beneficial to preserve those funds and invest those funds in interventions that could occur during the school year. So we're obviously recommending here option one. So with that in mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about some of our initial planning with respect to what fall.
Presidio, can I ask you to hold off on continuing with the planning for fall? Because the board does need to provide some very intentful consideration of the first two items based on some decisions that need to be made. So what I'd like to be able to do is open up first the discussion regarding graduation, then the summer learning, and then we'll go on to the fall, if that works for you. Thank you. So I do have a number of board members who have shown a wish to speak. I've got Megan, followed by Rachna, Ricky, Stella, Laura Jane, and Carl and Elaine.
And Chair Corbett Sanders, I put up the slide that was going to be the last one after we've done everything. So the first two are the items here for school board decision points. I put up so board members can reference that.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Ms.
Karen,
McLaughlin?
I think Stella and Laura Jean were ahead of me. I don't mind speaking earlier.
No, you actually had your hand up and you and then took it down again. So that's why I just left you in the queue where you were.
Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. So Ms. McLaughlin?
I'm in the same boat. I must have hit the wrong button.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, did you want to speak or do you want to hold off?
I'll hold off. I want to hear from some of my colleagues first.
Okay, I'm going to start.
Thank you, Dr. Anderson. I appreciate that.
Yes. Thank you. I'm trying to be really mindful of how much we have to cover, but I know we have a lot of questions, so bear with me. First and foremost, I do want to say thank you to staff because we realize the scope of what you have to deal with and what you've had to condense in a high-level presentation to us, and I know that is not an easy task. Somebody has their mic on, so I'm hearing their feedback. I also want to be sure that I'm coming into this conversation in the spirit of what is happening right now, which is reframing my thinking. Everything is new, everything is different. Our normal has been changed. So the expectations that we typically have cannot be brought into this conversation because of our current climate. So I appreciate all of the thoughts and all of the stakeholder conversations that have been had, and definitely I know there will be more to come. I will go through a few of my items and then I will give you some opportunity to respond. One of the first things, it's really regarding the community engagement. I would love if we could get together some sort of comprehensive but simplified message that we can all as school board members either post on our social media or include in our newsletters regarding the opportunities for engagement by our community. Some sort of one-stop shop list of information, if that is possible. Thank you to Dr. Brabrand for setting the stage. I really appreciate the outcomes that were listed and what the expectations are of us for today. And I appreciate that clarity of expectations. One of the things that was discussed, and I don't recall the slide, is regarding I think it was Lorraine who talked about this, regarding the high number of infections or impact to the Hispanic community. I think she said 59+%. I'm wondering what additional measures should be or are being considered for our schools that reflect those communities in great numbers. I would imagine we would need to take even more precautions in those cases. So that's my first question. Second question, I think Mr. Smith talked about cloth masks. I'm curious in terms of what is going to be the responsibility for sanitizing of those cloth masks? Will it be individual? Will students be responsible for taking that home? If you could talk about that a little bit. Regarding the summer plans, all of them, I think, have this question in mind for me. What are we expecting in terms of the increase in teacher work hours? What are we expecting regarding teacher compensation? If you could speak to that. I will stop here for just a moment and kind of pick up my time in a little bit. Hello?
So thank you, Rick, Dr. Anderson. I think there are a few people on my team that can talk about that. I will say I can follow up with John Torrey about helping the board have a simplified message as we leave this meeting about additional engagement. We know that needs to happen. So I can follow up with John and follow up with the board on that matter. I'll let Mr. Smith talk a little bit about, or Mr. Planenberg, cloth mask. And as far as the summer, I'll let Dr. Presidio talk about what our thoughts are around teacher compensation and work hours, if they're different in the virtual plans that we presented. And then we can talk about high Latino population schools and supports. I'll see if Mr. Smith or Dr. Ivy want to share about that.
So with regard to cloth masks, I'll jump in there. We know again that the recommendation is for cloth masks, and we could ask our families to provide those masks for students and then backfill for those students who don't have those masks. We wouldn't have the ability to sanitize those masks at the school site or within the school system. And for those students where it would be an issue or a problem, we could then look at the Kentex, the surgical type mask that we use for students, and could provide those and could look at the costs for providing those.
Dr. Presidio?
Thank you. So, Dr. Anderson, I understand your question really is kind of having two parts, one about expectations for teacher workload and compensation. First, there would be no expectation for teachers to participate in the summer learning options that we've just provided. That would be optional, and we do have a lot of teachers that we know that actually not only like to, but actually rely on some of those summer learning opportunities for additional compensation during the summer. So we don't anticipate having a problem finding staff to work in the programs, although we do need to let them know as soon as possible what the schedules would be so that they could plan accordingly. So the second question is really around compensation, and we would be using our established compensation rates for these programs that we already use and have used historically.
And
The
I
other
can answer
question with high need schools with high numbers of at-risk population.
So I'll start, and then perhaps Lorraine can answer or provide any additional information. I will just say that we're monitoring the numbers in each of our school areas and around our county. And if there was a high number of cases or evidence of community spread, then we would work very closely with the health department to see what additional precautions we may need to take.
Lorraine, did you want to add anything to Dr. Ivy's comments?
Dr. Duran, I think you need Ms. Troughton's phone near the mic.
I think that she's off of the call, but
She actually got on here, so I didn't use it eventually, but let me see if I'll try and catch her. She's actually on her own now.
And I would certainly reiterate that we would work with the county health department to talk about any additional supports that we would need to put in place for schools where we might have greater ability for community spread and greater instances of actual COVID within the community. So working very closely with our colleagues would be key.
I have Lorraine on the phone now. She was trying to speak, but for some reason wasn't heard, so I can put her on now for her answer.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Lorraine.
My apologies. Yes, I agree with both what Dr. Ivy has stated and what Marty Smith has said. We would also continue to work with facilities and monitor all of the data and the trends as we try to protect our communities and provide the best level of safety for our students.
Lorraine, if I may follow that up with, I understand from again, being in the community and having some information from folks who live here that there are some hot spots, primarily in our region. Do you have any of that information, or is this just anecdotal that is not necessarily accurate from what I've been hearing?
So, Dr. Anderson, I'll give you a go back if you like after Ms. Troughton speak.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was my time all the way done?
Yes.
Oh, shoot. Okay. Thank you. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Ms. Troughton?
Yes, thank you. This is not anecdotal information. This information are statistics that are taken directly off of the dashboard for Fairfax County Health Department. And Fairfax County Health Department is acutely aware of the hotspots throughout our Fairfax County, and they do deploy resources as necessary to those areas. I can provide additional information once I reach out to the health department. If you all would like to have that additional information, I'd be happy to do that.
Thank you, Ms. Trouton. If you don't mind, do you have the information by zip code? Because I think that's what Dr. Anderson is alluding to, which was published over the weekend.
The information is not available by the entire zip code. When you look at the dashboard, you will see the first three numbers of the zip code, and that is because of the confidentiality piece as we continue to, as the health department continues to identify cases and gather data.
We can work with communications to provide that information to the board as it relates to the dashboard that the health department has. The dashboard has very helpful data on numbers of cases. It provides maps by zip code area so that you can see where we have more cases. And so we can certainly include that in our regular updates to the board.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'm now going to go to Ms. Karski.
Thank you. I want to kind of bring us back to graduation, and that's where I'll begin my questions for this portion. I'm looking at the three options. As my colleagues already know, this is actually a very personal decision for me, as I do have a senior this year. So this impacts my family, and I really do feel the disappointment of our seniors and our families around this particular issue. So I would like to know, as we see there are other school jurisdictions around us that are giving a summer option. And what I'm really looking to understand, and I think it's important for our communities to understand, what is our thinking and what data have we used to come to these conclusions why a fall face-to-face graduation would be more likely to happen than a summer option. And some of the things that I have heard from my community are, why not a summer function? Why can't we do it outside? Why couldn't we practice social distancing in an outside format? So I would really like to hear staff's thinking around this.
Sure. I can start, and then I'm going to ask Lorraine Trouton to also add in. And we're basing our decision based on our Fairfax County data, our health department data, and we want to make sure that we're providing the best graduation experience without putting our students and families and staff at risk. And our data shows us that truly we continue to have outbreaks, and and have been advised not to have any large group gatherings in August. Ms. Trouton?
Yes, thank you. That is correct information that Dr. Ivy has just provided. We've worked very, very closely with the health department, and we are following their recommendations. As mentioned earlier, the behavior of this virus is very unpredictable, and that UVA model does suggest that we will still continue to see an uptick in the number of cases in the summer months.
Thank you. I think it's really important that we ensure that our community hears that and has access to this data, and that while we are making this decision informed by the data and by the recommendations of health professionals, and not just what we would like to see happen or what we hope happen. And the other part that I just want to kind of focus on is make sure I understood this correctly. If we are unable to have anything in the fall, then an in-person graduation option will be canceled for this graduating class. Is that the recommendation?
That's correct, Ms. Pekarsky. This is Dr. Brabrand. That's absolutely correct. And
okay,
if I could just elaborate on that for a moment, I think it's important to be straight from the shoulder with the community about our reality, and that's what we've tried to do in this presentation. We've spent a lot of time working with the health department. We need to make data-based decision-making, conditions-based decision-making. Graduation, people want to know. It's mid-May. They want to know the plan. And I wish the results and data were different, but they're not. And we want to do the celebration. We want to provide some closure with that photo opportunity. The kid gets back in the school with their parents, following, again, health department guidelines, but a chance for closure. We know it's not what every kid or parent would ideally want, but it is a chance to have something. And if conditions are better in the fall, we would commit to that face-to-face graduation. But at some point, we also believe if it's still that bad this fall, it's time to move on and not string along our students and families. It gets more and more complicated for the winter to move inside to try to do graduations. The fall would still allow us to be outside. And, you know, it's a tough time all around right now. We're trying to bring our best thinking, and we believe our community is ready for us to make decisions. And these are the recommendations I brought the board today. I know it's tremendously difficult to want to disappoint our kids. No principal, no staff member wants to, but we're also trying to do something to make sure that they, their families, our staff stay safe. So that's the tough part of this whole conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Burt. Thank you. It is disappointing, and I agree. We have to make data-based decisions based on health recommendations by professionals. And with that in mind, I do support the recommendations as you have brought forth, and appreciate the fact we're looking at more creative ways with the virtual video to honor our students. I think that's important. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Cohen?
I had a couple of areas of questions for both. I guess I'll start with graduation. Certainly, like my colleague, I will say this is the #1 email that I've been getting the last week and a half from parents. I think one thing that could be helpful is if Ms. Troughton doesn't mind explaining the difference between the health rates in Prince William, where they are promising a late August graduation, versus what we're experiencing here in Fairfax County.
Ms. Troughton, are you able to answer that?
Actually, I do not know what data the Prince William County is using to make their decisions. I just know that FCPS has been in collaboration with our health department to make some decisions regarding our specific data here in Fairfax County.
Thank you, Ms. Troughton. I think just going forward when we're talking about communications, I think that would be very helpful information for parents to be able to understand why in Prince William they can do an outdoor in August. They feel like that was something that we didn't consider because it wasn't on the survey. And so I think giving, again, more transparency about why we didn't, and hearing and seeing now the data, obviously, you know, we're in a bad situation potentially for August. So I support it, but I do think we need to give parents some better understanding of what that is. Also, some more understanding of what the virtual video will be. Will it be like a virtual graduation? I was lucky enough to get to attend my niece's virtual Penn State graduation, and I will tell you it was awesome and not at all what I expected it to be like. And so I agree with Ms. Harsky that I think being able to do something in a meaningful way for our seniors and their families is so important, but it has to be driven by data. So I'm supportive of that. And again, understanding that we need to do a better job of explaining why we're in a different situation. My question about summer, a few things. I'm highly supportive of the online campus. As many high school class opportunities as we can provide for our kids, I think is awesome and sorely needed. I have some grave concerns about the virtual ESY and PAC. I don't know how parents are going to be able to do that. I understand that in person is not an option, so please know that I'm expressing this as just, I know we're doing the best we can, so I hope that we're going to put as many resources in place as humanly possible for our PAC and our ESY parents. For the continuity of learning, particularly in high school, and I guess throughout all, I just want to make sure, will teachers be compensated for their office hour requirements?
Yes. So let me just elaborate on that a little bit. So the teacher office hours would be something that teachers would apply for summer compensation to perform. So it would not be every teacher. It would be select teachers that applied for that position, and then they would be compensated, again, based on our existing compensation for summer instructional rates that we currently use.
And that's even if we just go with the broader continuity of learning, sort of a semi-extension of the distance learning plan that we're looking at now.
That's correct. And the differentiation between those two in terms of teachers is if we had the option to run an expanded amount of instructional programming under the option for a site-based, if you will, virtual site-based summer program, that we would staff with additional teachers, and that's where your additional cost comes in.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Dr. Presidio.
And Ms. Cohen, if I could give you a little more information about the virtual celebration. That video includes a student clip, a text, and a photo of each senior. It has the logo, music, and video highlights from the school. It's not an actual traditional or formal graduation. Each senior will have an individual recognition, and there's a school, each school can personalize it, and it'll be a meaningful keepsake for that student. At the end of June, it'll be recorded live video stream on a date chosen by the school. And the videos can be recorded from any location and then updated. And so that's just a little more information. The principals are very excited about this and are ready to get started on creating this for every school.
The one thing that I would just share, and I hope that we could incorporate it in some way, is if we're uncertain what the future, and I know we're all feeling that way very much, what the future is going to look like, that we may not fall in person, may be out of our control to offer or not. I would strongly encourage that we at least have an opportunity for kids in that video, as silly as it sounds, but pulling the tassel from one side or the other to the other. There is meaning in that. And so I'm hopeful that any sort of virtual experience that we give them would at least incorporate that piece.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I now have Ms. Sizemore-Heiser.
Great. Thank you very much. I'm going to start also kind of go back to graduation with a couple other questions. And then some for summer, I may need to go back on some of these since we haven't had the documents for very long. I'm still kind of wading through them as we talk since we got them today. For graduation, like my colleagues, I very much want to try to find a way to have some sort of together celebration. I love the video idea, but something where the kids can celebrate together, whether it's virtually or what. But I've been getting a lot of things from my constituents about drive-in or drive-through graduations, where there's a car parade perhaps, or using a drive-in movie theater where people stay in their cars. Can you talk a little bit about why that is not an option or considered, or if it was considered, why it's not presented for an August graduation?
We did consult with the health department on this, and Ms. Stratton. Um,
Yes, I'm sorry, I missed the question.
The question was on car parades or drive-in graduations, even if it's done by individual schools. I'm just trying to get a better understanding about why that would not fit in within the health department guidelines for an August type of graduation for our seniors, where if they're sitting in their cars, or even if they don't get their diplomas during the parade, there's at least some sort of parade where they can kind of honk and wave, and just something that's, you know, that we can do in August for them. I'm just curious about the car parades or drive-in graduations.
I think that in consulting with the health department, we did not discuss at that time a car parade. But again, the concern is the number of cases that continue to increase. However, we can go back to the health department and pose that question for additional information for the board.
I mean, we want to see what my colleagues think, but I would very strongly urge you to ask the health department about some sort of drive-in options or car parade options where the students and their parents can remain in their car, to do, or a parade or something that we can do, and maybe even have it live streamed, or the students can live stream it so their families can watch some sort of live stream celebration by their school, something where they're doing something together, not just a video of them sort of streamed.
And Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, I would also add that in addition to the health department, we are reaching out to the Fairfax County Police Department to get a little more information about car parades and whether or not they would recommend those, given the number of cars that we might have in a car parade and the safety for students, et cetera. So we'll be working with the health department and the police department.
So, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, this is Dr. Brabrand, and I do want to say, again, I don't know if we specifically in the last few days asked the health department, but we've had a lot of discussion about car parades in general, and part of the concern is about bringing that many people on campus and our ability to then manage. You know, our graduations are thousands of people, thousands of cars onto the property, and managing that, people getting out of their cars. And part of what the health department has said to us, and I just want you to hear this, said to me as superintendent, what are you willing to risk for graduation? And I feel like just this weekend, our own county leadership made very clear that we don't need to be risking the health of our community to reopen too quickly, or to have a graduation face to face or something very close to it that puts anyone in danger. And that's why the recommendations I brought for you today are our best thinking. It's not the perfect solution. It's not a live to live graduation, but it is the best thinking with all of the information we currently have. We'll be glad to follow up, but my recommendations as provided are still the ones that I think need to be moved forward, and decide whether the board can go with this decision making for the community.
Okay, I would just like to some follow up on whether people staying in their cars kind of parade is feasible, so we can share that with our constituents to know why it is or is not feasible for a variety of reasons.
Understood. Understood. Thank you.
The other thing I wanted to ask about for our sort of, again, around the line of graduation is, can we do some sort of virtual celebrations where the students can see each other, even if we have to chunk it into groups? So there's some sort of togetherness on that planning. This also maybe applies to the 6th grade promotion ceremonies, award ceremonies, things like that, where we do those virtually, because I understand the dangers of face-to-face, but there is some way to do those celebrations.
So I'm going to rely on some of my principal experts for this, and I know Ms. Brumfield has some additional information about the virtual celebration, but we would be using an outside company and that has the platform for this, and the students are recorded individually, and then those and the slides are uploaded. So Ms. Brumfield, can you maybe provide some additional information? I don't think there's that opportunity that Ms. Sizemore is, Kaiser is asking.
Good afternoon. This is Pamela Brumfield from Edison High School. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and other school board members and Ms. Sizemore. So we were tasked with looking at a variety of companies that could provide this service to us. Overwhelmingly, the companies that we did look at, they recommended a recorded ceremony or recorded celebration that would be streamed live at a particular date and time that a school did choose. Most places, they said, preferred not to do a live broadcast because there can be quite a few technical issues with a live broadcast, and getting all of the different people and factors together during a real live broadcast and stream, they found caused really actually more difficulties. There's a lot of technical, things to do in coordination. So they said for the best experience and to allow kids to celebrate, they recommend recording and then showing it live at a particular time. I do think, though, that schools are trying to create meaningful live celebrations with kids. So for instance, we do senior town halls where we get our seniors online at different times. And we don't have all 500 sign on at one time. We can't support all of that, but we've had 150 or 200 seniors online at the same time. So it might be something that schools look to do, not necessarily in the virtual celebration, but schools perhaps can create other experiences where groups of kids are getting online to celebrate, but it may not be in that video format.
And I don't know if Mr. Smith or Jamie Lane has anything else to add.
The only thing I would say then is that perhaps there could be some guidance to our schools principals on different ways to create these ways for kids to get together and celebrate. So it's a little more consistently happening across our county for not just high school again, but for our sixth graders, our award ceremonies, all of these pieces to communicate to our schools so our kids can have some of these celebrations that I think will help their mental health and sense of connection.
Yes, thank you. We'll definitely do that.
Thank you. Karen, is my time up? Do I need to go back for the summer school piece of it?
You have 33 seconds if you want to use that, and then if you need to go back, we'll approach it then.
Okay. So the first thing I wanted to mention with the summer programming is that I think one piece that I feel is missing here is a chance to do some of our social emotional learning and our building connections and re-engaging students over the summer. I understand that you're saying, teachers need a break. They've been working very, very hard, and some of our families want a break. But I've also been hearing from a lot of families that feel like they're sort of alone and on their own doing this, and they want that connection for their students. And the students tell me the most important piece to them is that connection. So I feel like that piece is missing, and perhaps the canceled programs, the enrichment programs, there's a lot of teachers who rely on that income can be used to support this type of learning, or at least create some of the connections with fun projects. So if you could speak to whether that was thought about in terms of the social emotional piece over the summer.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a great question. It is something that we've talked about, and it's something that I think the students that are participating in the different programs that we are recommending to offer would actually be part of those programs, and there would be those connections and those opportunities there for relationship building and connection. I think the continuity of learning program, as it's currently designed for all students, there's not as much connection there as we would like, and that's totally driven by budget. So you raised the question of redistributing funds from canceled programs into other programs, and we've already done that in our budget. So with the proposal that we brought to you today, that is maxing out the available budget that we have for these particular programs. So when we increase, for example, the amount of students that would participate in the high school credit recovery and intervention program, that's relying on funding that we would have used to support some of the other programs that are being canceled. So what we tried to do is we really tried to prioritize what are the programs and the services that we think are most important to be delivered during the summer, what are the programs that would lend themselves to be delivered in a virtual format, and really trying to preserve some of the opportunities for additional funding that we would get from the federal government to be used to do some of the things that you're mentioning with social emotional engagement in the fall.
So,
all right, so basically what you're saying, sorry, go ahead, Karen.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, do you want a go back?
Yeah, I'll go back for a go back. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Frisch?
Thank you. I think, it's been a lot to take in this morning. I want folks to know that we didn't receive this information until pretty late this morning. And so, there's a lot of gravity with the choices that we have to make today, with very little opportunity to sit and actually ponder the information that we've been presented with. I think I got mine at 20 after 11 today. To that end, and we've talked a great deal about what is, when is the right time, et cetera. The slides about social distancing and talking about masks and such. Can you walk through scenarios of the types of things that we're considering? It's fine and good to tell folks that we're looking at increased testing, isolation and quarantine, increased workforce, but I think people want to know what does a return to in-school classroom work look like if there's no vaccine, if there's no viable medication.
So, Mr. Frisch, I'm sorry. That section of the presentation, we're going to address the return to the school in the fall in the next piece of this presentation.
Well, and
so
that's
we're going
fine.
to focus today on, on
Understood.
graduation and summer school, if you don't mind.
Sure. I will say that there is a connection here because the graduation plan as presented ties the possibility of an in-person ceremony to fall. And, I'd be hard pressed to explain to a parent how we could return to normalcy in the classroom in the fall, but not have an in-person graduation. So I guess my question would be, and this has been raised in a slightly different way about the timing here, because I don't think any of us want to do anything that's not safe. But why are we closing the door after the fall instead of keeping it open so that possibility of a winter or early spring in-person event for our graduates, if it's safe to do so? I understand the concerns about, having to do things inside, et cetera. But if it's safe to do so in those circumstances this winter or in the spring, why wouldn't we pursue those opportunities?
So, Mr. Frisch, thank you. And it's a very fair question. And I would just say to you, I think it's a balance between trying to decide how long we hold out to have the face-to-face graduation versus the need for our students and families to feel closure, that there was a celebration, there was a photo recognition, there was a chance to get back in the building and be photographed in the cap and gown, and not have people feel that they're strung along. The fall's not working and disappointment again, and then the winter. And so it's a balanced question. I mean, there's no doubt we could continue to wait, but I also feel a powerful sense of letting people have closure on what the plan is. And so that's the best response and the most honest response there is. If it's not good by the fall, the conditions for going indoors in the winter are only more complicated. And again, this is our best thinking, my recommendation.
So I would note that having a sense of closure does not necessarily relate to the ability to have a safe ceremony. So I would encourage us to think a little bit more broadly here. Let students and parents decide what closure looks like for them. I think we should all admit that there are going to be a number of students who are not going to show up for an in-person event because either they've moved on when we end up having it or whatever. But there will be a sizable number of students and parents who would like to have an in-person ceremony if it's safe to do so in the fall, if it's safe to do so in the winter, or even in the early spring. I don't think that we should, close the door arbitrarily because we're hoping that that will help them get closure. So I'd like us to remain a little open-minded about that. On the question of masks and such, I assume that's being left until we have our discussion about the fall. But I'd love to know more about the cost here, because I'm not certain that a fabric mask is of as much use as people might think it is.
So, Mr. Frisch, excellent question. Your time is up, but I would like them to answer your question about the pros and cons of your paper versus cloth, because it's important to get answered, if you don't mind. So, Ms. Troughton.
I can let Ms. Troughton speak, and I know that we've been on all the calls with the health department, and we asked very clearly as we were thinking about PPE for our own employees and thinking about the kind of mask that we would need for employees and or students. The answer from the health department was that, again, given the types of interactions that we would be having, that cloth masks would be suitable, and those are guidelines from the CDC as well. When you look at the medical grade masks, the N95 and other medical grade masks, they feel that those supplies should be used for those personnel who are on the front lines, who are working in instances where they would have greater opportunity for fluids to be exchanged. And again, really more for our medical personnel and less for, again, the kinds of interactions that teachers and students might be having with one another. So that was clearly based on the recommendation from the health department, because we'd been going back and forth ourselves and clearly wanted to get some guidance on whether we continue to go with the inventory that we have in our emergency inventory, or whether or not we should go with a different type of material. And their recommendation was the cloth.
And Mr. Smith, with Ms. Troughton on the phone here, she said that's exactly what she would have said. She doesn't have anything additional to add.
Excellent.
Well, I hope we'll get into a conversation about the use of masks as in a way that's actually probably applicable to what happens in our schools versus what we'd like to see happen in our schools.
Yeah, we'll bring that up. I know a number of people have that question. Ms. Tolan.
Hi, yes. I'm happy to follow Ms. Bakarski and Laura Jane Cohen. A number of the things that they brought up around graduation were similar to mine. I definitely want to support the fact that we need to have that data and information out to our families as to how we're making the decisions. And I also was happy to hear the discussion about the videos, and sounded like there is quite a bit of opportunity for each particular school to kind of put their brand and some of their tradition into those videos. And so I hope that is definitely true, and look forward to seeing some of that. And also just wanted to back up this idea of having our principals work very closely with their student and parent groups for planning graduations, to maybe do some kind of fun virtual senior town hall or other kind of celebration as well. So let me move on to summer. One of the things I wanted to ask about and just get a little bit more information is around the online classrooms. Dr. Presidio, I was wondering what the array of classes would be that would be available on that tuition basis for our students, and if that would have any changes to coursework that the students at the high school center have already signed up for the next academic year. For example, would they be able to take an algebra class perhaps they'd signed up for next year during this summer? If you could just give me a little more information on that, that would be great.
Sure, thank you. So the online campus offers a number of courses in a variety of different content areas: language arts, math, social studies, science, world languages, some elective courses. And students have the ability to to select to take those courses for original credit during the summer. So when students are making their course selections for what they would be taking during the following school year, they're obviously taking into consideration what courses they would be taking in the summer. And that's part of the reason that we do need to make a decision as early as possible so that we can have that registration process open back up and our students can finalize their summer course selections and get things finalized for fall registration purposes as well.
Okay, so basically a student, if we're thinking about the fact that we may be doing distance learning in the fall, for example, they may elect to take the class during the summer instead of waiting for the fall. That's true?
Yes, that's true.
Okay. You mentioned the numbers, and particularly for planning that budget around the summer programs. And I know you, for example, added, another 20% to, some of our targeted intervention numbers, et cetera. Do you anticipate at all having a situation where we'll have more students interested in signing up for these programs, given, that we're in the distance learning situation now? And if so, how would we go about selecting the students, or would it just be a first come, first serve kind of basis? Give any ideas around that?
So it is hard to predict, but we do think that that 20% number gives us a pretty good cushion, and we would actually anticipate fewer students than that 20% that would be interested in participating. What we actually envision, because this is at the high school level that we're talking about right now, what we envision at the high school level is that students might self-identify as needing to take that coursework, but it's really, I think, the teachers that would identify students that they have concerns about being adequately prepared for the next level of that course or the next grade level the following year. So those teachers would be contacting parents and students and recommending that they enroll in the course. Again, it would be optional, it would be free of charge, and they would not be, I don't think there would be a demand above 20% to do that.
Thank you. One of the things I'm really seeing in my discussions with teachers and principals and just how distance learning is going right now is they're talking about spending a lot of time with students around, organizing their work and really, strengthening students' executive functioning skills. I think that, that is often a challenge for our students, and I think it's been really exacerbated by the distance learning. Yes. Last question. So is that something that would be added potentially for summer learning, is bolstering executive functioning?
I think you're talking about a couple different things there. Some is executive functioning, some is just kind of organizational skills and management and time management perhaps. And we actually do have resources that are available now that students can access and the teachers can access. A lot of that work is largely derived from some of the AVID work that we do in our schools. So we do have resources that we can use. Some teachers, I think, have accessed some of that. I would see us definitely making things like that available still in the summer, but also in the fall if we come back either in a virtual learning environment or in a social distancing environment. That's something that we would be planning to incorporate more coherently, I would say, across all of our instruction, because I agree with you, we do see a need for that right now.
Thank you.
Dr. Presidio. I'm going to go on to Ms. McLaughlin.
Okay, thank you. Let me first ask Dr. Presidio, what have you and staff done to consult with K12.com, that is one of the largest online learning programs, with respect to our summer offerings, summer course offerings?
So there's a number of different online providers beyond our online campus. And we do continue to look at those for options both for summer and for next fall, as you'll see in some of the subsequent slides in this presentation. All of these programs have different benefits and different challenges associated with them. Our online campus model, we do believe, offers a very high quality curriculum that is aligned to the state standards. A lot of these other programs that you'll see, like K-12, those might be more aligned to Common Core standards than our own state standards. There's also, within our own curriculum, there's a lot more that we've done to actually work on students' portrait of a graduate skills. The instructional model that we have in online campus is really the most robust that we've seen when we compare to any of the national models in terms of the amount of teacher support and synchronous learning that students receive. In our regular online campus learning environment, there's a lot of proctoring of exams. So students actually take their midterm and their final exams in person so that those can be proctored. And our success rate in online campus has been incredibly high in terms of both student grades and grade point average and students passing AP exams. So it's been higher than it's actually been in our traditional school environments. So we think that we have a good model, but I think the issue is how do you scale that model up effectively and cost efficiently? And if we can't do that, then we do need to be looking at other models. So we are looking at other models like K-12, like Virtual Virginia and other models.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio, because I have heard from parents who were worried about our rollout. So they did enroll in K-12 and they found that the curriculum for K-12 aligned beautifully with our high school curriculum in every single one of the courses, and the delivery has been outstanding. And it does go to the point I raised with you when we first reviewed the draft, which is FCPS Online Campus has been shown to be successful, and the goal was to scale it up. So I just want to put an emphasis there for our summer programming, that whether it's scaling up our own online campus or looking to K-12 where we don't have existing curriculum. But I want to caution, you said something about needing to do more ELL curriculum development. I would just caution again, we're trying to get this scaled up as soon as possible. I am less interested as a board member on us creating something out of nothing than going to existing online programs where the curriculum already exists. So that would be my first point about summer overall. Dr. Presidio, I'm very much in alignment with you and Dr. Brabrand. Doing it virtually makes sense. My greatest concern, which we'll talk about more, is getting ready for fall reopening. And that brings me to the graduation piece. I would like to ask Ms. Troughton, are you familiar with the U.S. Naval Academy having their in-person cadet graduation? It just happened in May. Were there any COVID cases that came out of that in-person graduation, which I believe was restricted just to the cadets, not the parents? If you're not aware of it, why isn't the Public Health Department in Fairfax County looking at that?
Yes, thank you, Megan. What I think is important to note is that with these other types of graduation, there were specific criteria that the graduates were held to, such as quarantining prior to the actual graduation. I would need to look into the specifics of the graduation that you're addressing, but from what I have read and researched, there were specific criteria that each area used to protect their graduates.
Okay, my second question is, when we saw the photo of school buses and what we'll be doing in the fall, even if we reduce it down to one student per seat, Ms. Troughton, can you explain how those children sitting on that school bus in that close proximity, one seat to the next seat, why would it be unsafe to have a fall graduation?
I think that in these cases, we have to continue to follow the recommendations of the health department, given the data that we have present to us at this moment, and looking toward the UVA model and the statistics that are currently being used to guide our decisions.
Ms. Troughton, I really appreciate you're not a public health official, so regrettably your answer didn't speak to my question, which is, We know how close those children will sit on a bus next to each other, and we're going to make that kind of decision making, but we're then saying Fairfax County Schools can't figure out an equal distancing for doing the graduation. So my colleagues, I would request that the school board be able to have a briefing with public health officials, because we are being asked to make a decision about graduations. My goal is we don't have to determine anything until Labor Day, as noted in the presentation. But like Mr. Frisch, I don't feel right now that this board has enough information to make an informed decision, and we owe it to our families to do that.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Keyes-Gamarra.
Thank you. I will follow up with comments from various colleagues. I was just sitting here trying to kind of sum up how it sounds like we're all feeling, and certainly, this is just my view. Everybody can express how they feel, but it seems that we are struggling with the removal of this choice, and certainly, and with respect to graduation, the removal of a choice that everybody cherishes. It looks like there's some concern with respect to the factual basis of that decision, particularly when it comes to other jurisdictions and what they have decided to do versus what we are recommending. And so with that, I would ask, with respect to the graduation decision, that perhaps we do recognize that parents and our students are suffering with the loss of that choice, and focus on identifying safe choices that would be within local control, meaning that each of our schools would be able to look at those choices and decide how they could go forward based on what has already been decided is safe. I would also say that we need to be able to say to the public, these are the facts that makes us different from surrounding jurisdictions. I know that someone, I'm sorry, I don't recall who, I think it was Laura Jane Cohen, asked, what is the difference between the facts that were, that Prince William, for example, may be acting upon versus us? And when it comes to a big decision like this, I think that is important, because I don't want it to look as though our decision was arbitrary. And then finally, I would say that I would hope that one of those safe choices would be an opportunity for students in each local school to come together in some sort of a virtual party, whether it be, I think Ms. Sizemore-Heiser called it a town hall, but some way that they would feel that they had that touch that they normally would have. Based on what I'm seeing today, I am not, I agree with Ms. McLaughlin, I'm uncomfortable making a decision when I feel as though we've not had an opportunity to fully review this. I'll stop there. I do have some comments regarding the other issue we're considering.
So, Ms. Keyes-Gamarra, would you like someone to respond to your comments regarding graduation, or are you seeing that as you've summed it all up as to what you've heard from your colleagues?
What I'm trying to see is, I'd like for them to consider those choices I mentioned, i.e. identifying safe choices for the local schools, and allowing the local schools to be able to choose between those, whether that is something that this has already been considered. Also being able to put forth factual information for our community so that they can understand the basis of our decision, which also takes into account what other jurisdictions, what other factual distinctions may exist in light of other jurisdictions. So I'm making a suggestion.
So Dr. Ivey, can you respond to that, please?
And Ms. Troughton would like to also respond after.
Okay.
And I have an input too.
So I will start, and we wanted to have some consistency across our high schools, and that is why we were recommending that the the photo opportunity and the video be done across our high schools. And we will be engaging our principals in other, in discussing what other safe choices there might be. And we'll definitely include if there's a way to do a virtual party or town hall that was suggested. As far as the communication, we wanted to hear from the board, but we certainly can include more factual information or the reasons why we are recommending something different than other surrounding jurisdictions. Ms. Troughton?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to go ahead and share some information regarding the Prince William data. When we look at Prince William data, there are approximately 2,291 cases and 53 deaths. When we look at Fairfax County data, there are greater than 6,200 cases and greater than 243 cases. And again, this is a fluid statement, so the numbers will be a little higher based on whatever website we're looking at, but that really is some very significant data between the two counties as to why one county would proceed in August and one county would not proceed in August.
And this is Marty Smith with a little more information from Prince William. I've just gotten verification from my counterpart in Prince William that while they did announce dates for in-person graduations utilizing social distancing guidelines and protocols, that the caveat that they've shared with the community is that that could all change based on guidance and input from the health department. So while they did announce, they recognize that the conditions may not be suitable for in-person or face-to-face, and would then be canceling those based on input from the health department.
So if I can just...
So Ms. Keys-Gamarra, do you want to go back?
Certainly. I just wanted to clarify that I was only using Prince William as an example. I think that I'm just trying to lay out for the community that we're considering everything. I'm not disagreeing per se. I think it's an important process.
Thank you, Ms.
Yes, I want to go back.
Dr. Braber.
Yeah, I just want to summarize for the community listening. And Lorraine, I was a social studies teacher, so catch me on the math. That's 3 times as many cases as Prince William and 5 times as many deaths. Is that correct? Roughly speaking.
Yes, that's correct.
So
Dr. Brabrand, this is Megan. I just have to also note, no, I'm sorry.
Come back. Ms. McLaughlin,
you need to know, Dr. Brabrand needs to know Prince William is about the size of Fairfax County. So we have to be data driven.
Ms. McLaughlin, why don't you have a go back one? Okay. So Dr. Brabrand, go ahead and finish.
I know, I don't know what Ms. McLaughlin was about to say. It may be there's a greater population, so what is it per capita? And I don't have that off the top of my head. We've been working closely with the health department the whole way through. I think Marty's point was clear in what Prince William communicated. I do want to share what I've heard some board members say to clarify something about decision making. I accept full responsibility. This presentation came late, but it's the reality of us trying to bring you as soon as we can as much information that you've asked for over the last 3 or 4 weeks, as we've had multiple things to do in recasting our budget, standing up distance learning, and we know we need to get this to you sooner so that you can make decisions. And in that vein, I just want to clarify, for summer school, we do need a decision today. For graduation, if you wanted to wait till Thursday, we could probably make that work. And I'd also like to say for graduation, we'd love the board to get consensus on options 1 and 2. Celebration, great. Photo opportunity, great. And sort of like Mr. Frisch and Ms. Sizemore-Heiser said, if we want to talk about whether we make a final call that the live face-to-face graduation in the fall is the final approach, we can spend more time talking about that. We don't have to decide that today or Thursday. if that's what the board decides. So maybe that is helpful for the rest of the board discussion on those two topics of graduation and summer school.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. Ms. Derenak Kofax?
Hi, yes. I wasn't going to touch on graduation, but I feel I need to a little bit because of data that's desired. This weekend, Fairfax County was noted as leading the way in the number of cases. And one of the biggest hotspots is in the area Ms. Corbett Sanders and I share, Hybla Valley and Groveton, with 37% of the people there who are testing positive. And that came with 329 cases out of 885 tests. So I think it's extremely important that we realize there are portions, and that wasn't even the highest area. There were higher areas in Annandale and West Springfield. I have that direct data as a result of just representing that data. So I think it's extremely important that while I appreciate what Dr. Brabrand said, we don't have to make a decision on this or that latest fall choice, because that did, even to me, who is relying on data and cautious about what I think Mr. Smith said, what are we willing to risk in order to have this celebration? What health risks are we willing to risk? So I think that's important to really understand that. I think it's important right now. I appreciate the videos. I appreciate similar functions for each. I think there need to be uniform functions. I don't think principals should be allowed. I think that it's very difficult for one that is not an equity-driven graduation, whereas now that's what we have. Everyone who wants to either goes to Mason or another high school or to the place in DC that I can't remember. But there's uniformity. If we're going to have car parades for one, everybody needs to have car parades. If we're going to, so I have a lot more to say on that, but I do want to get to my student learning questions. On page 28 of the presentation, I am concerned, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about IFTA, Young Scholars, and Bridge to K being able to do that. If we could go to page 28, please, on the presentation. I would like to hear a little bit more from staff, particularly about IFTA, the Institute for the Arts, as well as the elementary program attached to that, and Young Scholars, and Bridge to K, which I believe is like a 2-week program to acclimate kindergartners in ability to understand what that learning situation is going to be, particularly if it is going to be virtual. I'd like to know why we cannot accommodate that, or what were the thoughts about not providing those opportunities for our students? And then finally, what is the student tuition for online classes if your family doesn't qualify for FRM in the online learning programs?
All right, thank you, Ms. Derenak Kofax. Those are great questions. So I think all of the programs that are listed on here, we would really struggle to offer and operate them in a virtual format. The Institute for the Arts, obviously, we have different art courses that students can take there, but those are really reliant on supplies, materials, performances that need to take place. And when we talked to our program staff, we really didn't think that we could replicate anything, even on any type of reasonable scale that would warrant doing that in a virtual environment. Bridge to Kindergarten and Young Scholars, both of those programs are really enrichment type programs that are trying to support our students, obviously. And those programs, again, we really did not feel like those programs would be something that we could replicate in a virtual environment. There definitely are some things that we would need to do, as you pointed out, for our transitioning kindergarten students, that we would need to do if students have not had the experience of being enrolled in preschool, but we don't think that we could replicate the Bridge to Kindergarten program. What we would look to do instead is, once we determine what scenario we might be coming back in the fall, and we'll talk about some of those scenarios later in the presentation. We would work to try to figure out what those transition activities and opportunities and supports would look like in a virtual environment or in a face-to-face environment. But we don't really think that we could replicate that program as it currently stands in a virtual environment. And the Young Scholars, again, that's really a program that is very hands-on, project-based. The students do a lot of things like robotics, and that is really material and supplies dependent, and it would be really difficult to try to replicate that again in an online environment. So that was our initial thinking with respect to those programs.
So thank you, Dr. Presidio. Ms. Darren Fairfax, would you like to go back?
I would.
Okay, thank you. So now Ms. Omesh.
Yes, thank you. A couple of thoughts and then some questions. I just wanted to point out in this whole process, I don't think that anybody wants to close the door on any options or looking ahead at, more liberal possibilities. But I think it's important for us to consider that it does take months to plan as we get ourselves there, which is why we're having these conversations. I just wanted to put that out there. I would like to hear if thinking or maybe basic planning for both possibilities is feasible or is taking place. It may behoove us to just have those in mind. It does seem like, we're clearly thinking in that direction, but would love to hear a little bit about that just in contingency planning. Another thought I had about, the health update that we seem to be hearing indicates to me that nothing about it, what's being shared suggests that it's a good idea for us to reopen. And there is information maybe coming out this week about the state potentially having different expectations for Fairfax County. Obviously we'll wait to see what that is, but with the knowledge of that potentially coming, I think it's critical for us to think in that way. Given that that's the case, I think communication here is going to be key. I would perhaps suggest having a timeline even of what our plans are to communicate to the community what the different steps will be, or why we're doing certain things the way we are, how regularly we expect to be doing that. My third thought is just about consistency across schools. I've heard about certain schools doing these kind of car parties. Despite, I know we discussed addressing that earlier on, but even very recently, a drive-through party to honor teachers that happened in an elementary school that came to my attention. So just, again, would love to hear how we're planning to follow up on those kinds of things. And finally, before I go to my questions here, I wanted us to be very cautious. Earlier, the conversation about Hispanics being the most, having a high percentage of cases, just in how we decide to move about with that. It seems, I'm very sensitive to the idea of targeting based on that or paying attention to those trends. I think we should make decisions that are broadly beneficial and certainly be cautious of what information ends up, that we discuss liberally and how it can be used. So making sure that we don't make any assumptions here as we move forward. Given summer planning, I did want to ask, what have we been seeing with attendance rates and contact with families as a result, get up to this point with distance learning? I know that I saw the communications, the updates with every day, how many students, but there's something seems a little bit off because, you have certain days you'll have 300,000 plus students, but we don't even have that many students in this county. So I just would love to hear if we can have numbers maybe on the unique access or what it's been like to ensure that every student has been accessing learning in some way.
Thank you, Ms. Omesh. Do you want to go back?
Yeah.
So I can start with an answer to that question, Ms. Omesh. We've been working very closely with Blackboard to see if we can disaggregate that data based on those individuals who are scheduling and then tie that data to our Fairfax County Lawson information to figure out where these sessions are being scheduled. So again, we're still working with them to get that data set so that we can make that connection and provide that information for the board and for the community. We also know that within SIS, we have a contact log that our teachers are using to actually make note of the different kinds of connections they're having with students. What we have from the contact log information is that it's spotty across the county, and that some schools are using their own systems for logging those connections with students. So until we can work with our schools and work with our principals to ensure that we may be using the same system, we wouldn't have the robust data that you might be looking for. So we are, though, currently working with our vendor to see if we can get a data set to match that with our scheduler so that we can get a better sense of where these sessions are being held. We also note that while we may have had over 300,000 attendees on one particular day, we note that each time one student attends a session, that counts as an attendee. So you could have multiple students counting, or one student counting for multiple attendees.
Thank you. That is very helpful. And Mr. Smith, I think that Dr. Brabrand did indicate that he would start providing more detailed level participation data, that you all were asking for that from our vendor.
Yes, we are still in that process and are meeting with them on a daily basis to procure that data.
Great, thank you.
And
So,
Ms. Corbett Sanders, if I could just comment on the car parades question.
Yes, Ivy.
Yes, and I just wanted to share that those events are not school-sponsored events. There are some senior parents and PTA people who are starting to or wanting to plan such parades. But our recommendations from the school has been the two options that we described in June and July.
Great, thank you very much, Dr. Ivy. Ms. Marin?
Hi, I've actually lowered my hand. I don't need to comment on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Then I'm going to just take a quick moment. Regarding graduation, I would like us to decouple the decisions for this summer from making a firm decision at Labor Day on whether there is a physical presence graduation in the future. And I do support the virtual package that you all are suggesting, as well as allowing the students in the buildings. One aspect of the virtual package, though, that does make me a bit nervous is the whole issue of ensuring that all students in the graduating class are included in the virtual package. And so I would hope, Dr. Brabrand and Dr. Ivy, that you would require some sort of accountability measure to the local principals to make sure that every student in the graduating class is represented in that video. Additionally, any other events that there is a consistency across the county and not just one area. Regarding the summer programming, I have serious concerns about how we are going to deal with all students during the summer, but in particular our exceptional students with disabilities. I think that the two programs for the extended ESY and PSY is a good start, but it's not sufficient. And I would like to understand a bit more of what you're going to do to make sure that we provide those wraparound services and those therapies that are so important to our students, really beginning to make up for the gaps or the compensatory measures we've talked about. Thirdly, I do love the idea of having more robust continuity of learning for all students, as well as some credit recovery and credit attainment opportunities. I was surprised you didn't have Northern Virginia Community College's dual enrollment on there, or a heavier reliance on Virtual Virginia. So I'd like to know a little bit more about that, as well as how you plan on doing grading during the summer. Would it be a continuity of what we've done this over the past few months, or is it something else?
Well, Chairman Corbett Sanders, first, let me just share, I absolutely think with graduation, we could decide, the board, if it chooses, could decide today on items 1 and 2 and decide at a later date about the face-to-face and the time frame in which a face-to-face would be made. That's number 1. On ESY and the autism, preschool autism program, we, of course, did show both scenarios of that face-to-face. It's in the very beginning of August, and that was the issue that, you know, we had concerns about, but we had that in there as that second scenario. And I don't know, Dr. Presidio, did you want to say anything else about that scenario number 2? And I'll let you also share anything you would want on that final question around Virtual Virginia and dual enrollment with NOVA.
So I'm going to start with the second question, and then we can come back and see if Ms. Johnson or Ms. Stack has anything with respect to extended school year or PAC.
Okay.
Ms. Corbett-Sanders, you asked first about why we didn't include some other options like Virtual Virginia or Nova Community College. Those certainly are options that are available to students, among others. The presentation slides that we included here are just the summer programs that Fairfax County Public Schools is recommending to be offered. So there certainly are other options that students can pursue in addition to the programs that we offer. So that is the main issue. And I think you had a second question related to summer programs, if you could remind me of that.
Sure. My second question was making sure the grading piece.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, so the grading for online campus, obviously those classes are for original credit, and we use our county policy grading policies, and credit recovery is more customized based on the courses and the amount of credit that students are trying to recover there. So we have existing grading policies for both of those programs that would continue to apply for both programs during this summer.
Thank you, Dr. Presidio. Then along those lines, what I would like to recommend is that if we are to proceed with the addition of the summer programming, that we actually put together a very robust communications strategy that allows people to know what's available, not only through FCPS, but Virtual Virginia, NOVA, and all the different vehicles available to them so parents can make informed decisions. And I would also just feel that we need to look at, as part of the continuity of learning, that we provide some of the enrichment programming that we have today to all students during the summer as well, such as arts and music, if at all possible. So we have a number of go backs. It is 3:18. I just want to make sure that I'd like to kind of get a show of support at about 3:30 for these two items, and then we'll go to the next portion. So if people in their go backs could limit their time to 2 minutes, that would be great. So I guess till 3:45. And we have as go backs Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. McLaughlin first.
Thank you. I did want to come back a little bit to the to ESY and PAC, and to build a little bit on the comments made by two of my colleagues. One of them being about attendance. I know that's something we're working on. It's something that I've asked from the very beginning. But what I'm hearing from constituents and what I'm seeing from having kids who are accessing distance learning, and hearing what their classrooms look like. I know we have many kids who may be logging on, coming off, and not really attending to lessons. So I just urge us to get good data and be cognizant of that, especially when it comes to our students who will be participating in ESY, and what we are doing to make sure we're getting one-to-one connections with these kids and these families to ensure that they are accessing and completing what we are providing for them. I am very worried about that. And I can tell you that's also from personal experience with my own child who has an IEP. Because we may be doing all these great things, but if the kids are not actually accessing and completing things, and it is to know and goal. So, I'm worried about that for ESY, and I'm worried about what are we going to do to ensure that the kids who are identified have the technology, and what will that look like for K2? A little bit to that.
Thank you. This is Ellie Stack, and I can address some of the concerns, though I see that Teresa has also hit her microphone. So Teresa, I'll step back if you want to answer it first, and then I'll fill in as needed.
No, Ellie, go ahead. I was gonna refer it to you.
No problem. I appreciate the concerns that you just shared. And one of the unique opportunities that we will have when looking at a potential distance learning for extended school year service is the fact that all of the staff who are working with our students will be hired to provide the extended school year services, and we will be able to connect with them to ensure that our staff are providing the services, whether it's synchronous, online, and asynchronous, with their families. One of the components, though, that we would expect to be a part of this is that families or staff would connect with families on the phone. In addition to the students who don't have access to technology, we also are looking at how we're going to use the packets that we're sending home this summer, and having that opportunity for the staff who call the families provide coaching in how to have the student access the content of the packet. So there will be that expectation for that direct connection. One of the clarifications I would like to make was a statement that was made a few minutes ago regarding the PAC. The preschool autism classrooms that Dr. Presidio spoke about, those are our PAC classrooms that their school year calendar typically starts on July 2nd. And so the proposal that we have that he shared with you is for the students where their typical school year calendar does start in July. And so for those students, it's not an extended school year service that they're receiving. Instead, it is the typical service that is built into that program.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Johnson, do you have anything to add to that?
No, Ellie did a good job. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, I've probably used that most of my time. I appreciate that. And when we're talking about the family coaching and touching base, I think that is going to be an ongoing requirement. And I really want to see that as part of ESY, more than just, once or twice, but I think it needs to be consistent, because going back to an earlier comment that was made by Ms. Tolan, I think a lot of our kids who have IEPs are struggling with this format because of the executive functioning skills required. I'm done. Okay, I'm done. Sorry.
You acknowledged and then kept going, so I was like, oh, okay. Thank you, Ms. Pekarsky. Ms. Geismer-Heiser?
Thank you very much. Just a couple questions. First, to sort of piggyback off what Ms. Pekarsky said, so I'm glad she brought up the ESY and PAC. One question is there funding? Are you looking at expanding ESY from the more typical numbers of students who accesses each year, considering that there may be more of a need this year than previous years? So if you can address that, I'll ask the questions in a minute.
The current budget for the extended school year services does have some wiggle room for the addition of potentially more students who might be found eligible for these services. As you all may be familiar, extended school year services are services that are put in the IEP. So as we see that the numbers are going up, like I said, we do have some wiggle room in our budget. And then depending on how many more, if it does go up, we're not sure how much higher it might go up, then we might need to be coming back talking with Teresa Johnson about that concern.
But right now, from what the feedback that we've been receiving, of course, knowing ESY, people have been waiting for us to talk about it and waiting for us to be able to move forward. Until IEP teams have those conversations, we really won't have a good feel for the numbers, which is why we're hoping that there might be some consensus today with how we can move forward. When we left school back in March, we only have ESY on a few hundred IEPs, and we're expecting, as we shared with you earlier, about 3,500 IEPs. So that number is really going to help guide us. We do have some wiggle room, but if we do see a growth that we can't handle, we will continue with that conversation.
This is Dr. Brabrand. I just want to add, and Teresa, can you correct me if I'm wrong? As part of our engagement and some of the documentation we've actually provided the board today, when you reached out to ACSD and to SEPTA, and we showed these options for ESY, the preference was virtual from both organizations. Is that correct, Ms. Johnson?
Yes, that is correct, Dr. Brabrand.
Thank you.
On that point, actually, that was my next question is, have you considered a hybrid between the two where you do virtual and then have an option for August in person, obviously if safe, to help sort of solidify some of those skills and make sure our students understood those skills before starting school?
No, that has not been something we've considered up to this point.
Is that something that could be considered for some students who may need more intensive than they can access on virtual, or the students who can't access it well or don't have supports at home?
We can certainly circle back and have some conversation about what that could look like and what that could cost, and then consult with Dr. Brabrand.
Okay, I think that'd be good to talk about for some of the students, like Stella and Elaine mentioned, that may be at more risk of being able to access what they need in the virtual environment for ESY. The other question I had is on the connections, the phone calls and things like that. I'm assuming it'll be more robust than what traditionally happens in a collaborative ESY setting, where it's a once a week, 15-minute check-in. If you could speak to what that check-in will look like, that would be helpful.
Certainly. So the services you were just referencing, where sometimes during ESY, it's 15 minutes a week or even a whole month for those check-ins. That's our typical consult services.
That's what I meant. Sorry, consultant. Thank you.
No, totally, exactly.
Yeah, I'm a collaborative consultant. I knew it was one of the C words.
I know, no, you're good, you're good. What we're thinking here is we're bringing that consulting with the family in with what is now going to be our virtual class-based program. And so it is one of the components that we are going to be putting on the teacher expectations is that they are connecting with families throughout the week. And every week, as somebody mentioned earlier, yes, it is something that we would expect every week. That is going to be a required component. As you all said, our students need that. And it is how our teachers are going to be able to connect with the families to see how some adjustments might need to be made. The phone calls can talk about the packets that are coming home, and like I said, how those can be accessible to our students, how the other health skills that the students have on their ESY IEPs, how those can be worked on in the home environment, as well as to build on whatever services that they're receiving through the asynchronous and synchronous learning. So it is different than what occurs in our traditional summer face-to-face.
Let me make sure I understand this. So is this a synchronous option with check-ins or an asynchronous option with check-ins? Describe a little more what you're considering for virtual summer.
Sure. So the goal would be that it would be as synchronous as possible, depending on the student's abilities to access the technology. So just like what we're seeing now during the school year, why we want to have our teachers providing synchronous connections with students. For some students who are not able to access it during the time of the synchronous, we would like to have some asynchronous opportunities for those families as well. So we don't want to rule out students who can't be synchronous for whatever the reason. But I am envisioning the synchronous component as an important one for me with the family connections. For some of our students, we're also looking at a variety of digital curriculums or digital programs that work on the skills that students may be coming to extended school year for. And so in addition to that synchronous time with the teacher, and this connection to phone call, the students may be able to work on, let's say, a program that works on targeting reading skills. They may be able to work on that in addition to what they are doing during their official ESY time with the families.
And is there a plan of adding some of that executive functioning time to help students prepare for possible distance learning in the fall?
Yeah, so the ESY curriculum is guided really by the goals that are on students' IEPs. And one of the nice things that doing it virtually avails us to is more flexibility in how we group the students. And so when we met with one of the groups earlier this week, I believe it was the Special Ed PTA or SEPTA, they were concerned about social emotional, students who are coming to ESY to work on those social skills. And by doing it virtually, we will have some flexibility to group by student needs. But this executive functioning or the organization skills that you all are talking about are really so important for all of our students and our students with disabilities. So that will be a built-in component for our students in our program, continuing to work on those. But the major focus of the instruction is based on the IEP goals that for each student.
And one last question. I think Stella asked us about devices for K-2 students for our ESY. What's the plan for that?
And that one I'm going to have to look around to my colleagues virtually. I'm not sure where the county is right now with their with the plan for providing devices to those age groups. I do know that we are trying to get a feel in the Department of Special Services for the status of some of our population having access to devices. And I also know that we are putting in support into when we talk about the packets for the summer, so that for the families who are not able to access it, knowing, of course, synchronicities are preferred, but making sure that the connections that are being made through the phone are going to be as meaningful as possible for our students and for the families as well. So knowing that that might be an area, it's very likely that we're not going to have all of our students to have devices, and that our services will be starting at preschool on up through age 22, doing what we can to make sure that the services that are being provided are as high quality as possible.
All right. I have a question about our elementary school, the virtual credit intervention program. I see that we have it for high school, one of the options for middle school, but we don't have it as an option for elementary school. And I'm sure the research I've done shows that the loss of learning is potentially higher at the elementary school level. And I'm especially concerned for our kids kind of moving up to middle school. Can someone address why we didn't put that as an option for sort of intervention at the elementary school level?
Yes, thank you very much, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser. So let me just go back to that slide for just a second on elementary options so everybody can have that for reference. So there's two different...
learning, but it's
I'm sorry.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I think we have continuing learning, but we have an intervention piece. I just want to make sure we're addressing that piece of it.
Right, it's both pieces. So go ahead, Dr. Presidio.
So again, at the elementary level, we're really recommending that targeted interventions be offered more in the fall than in the summer. So what you see on this slide here is both middle school and elementary school. And option 2 would be more the intervention program that you're asking about, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, for select elementary school students that would need more intensive remediation services. And the cost on that program for elementary to provide services to one class, so essentially 25 students per grade level per school across all of our schools in the division, would be $7 million. It would be $850,000 to offer a similar model at middle school. And our feeling has been as a leadership team that, and with working with the principal associations, that investing $8 million in a very short-term program during the summer with a lot of uncertainty about what next school year is going to look like would not be as prudent as investing those funds in intervention and support services during the school year. And in the second part of this presentation, we're going to talk a little bit more about the scenarios and some of the budget impacts for some of the things that we believe that we need to do during school year 2021.
I would just be curious what the cost.
Miss
Can I just ask one follow-up question? That's the only one I have left.
You've actually exceeded your time.
Oh,
Do you?
okay, sorry.
Thank you. Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes, so to my colleagues, I'm sorry for interrupting. I know that's not our norm. I'm just very troubled that we continue to have these conversations about data, and then what's the difference between that and meaningful data and data in context. And we have a responsibility as the 10th largest school system to help lead meaningful conversations. When Prince William is 40% the size of Fairfax County, Loudoun is 36% the size of Fairfax County, I just simply ask whether it's Dr. Brabrand or anyone else, when we talk about raw numbers related to COVID cases, hospitalizations, and death rates, that we help lead and model for the community what it looks like to have those data and context conversations. So that's why it was upsetting to me, and I felt the need to stop it rather than wait through 7 more people commenting on why we can't make decisions maybe similarly to other jurisdictions. We need that proper analysis. When we look at the graduation ceremonies, and I know we're going to be talking far more importantly about reopening our schools in the fall, but to the 2 questions you asked, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, the reason I keep pressing on this is the governor is now about to allow churches to go ahead and resume their church services. And the public, where this matters, the parents who've dreamed of their children's high school graduations, are simply going to want us to be making decisions that reflect the environment in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And so I think we owe it to our families to be asking the County Public Health Department and Governor Northam and Chairman Jeff McKay, how is it that we're going to have people going to church on a weekly basis, sitting in whatever proximity they are in their churches, and we are communicating that we're sure we can do fall graduations? That's my only high level emphasis of the questions I think we need to continue. I've really appreciated my colleagues who are thinking broadly on this. And I will just reiterate that in terms of the summer programming, please, Dr. Presidio, bring back to the board what the other Washington area school boards and school divisions are doing, so our community can understand our approach to summer school versus the other Washington schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin. Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
Yes, thank you. And I actually agree with Ms. McLaughlin. I really was just trying to put some context into our discussion so that the community could understand why we're making the kind of decisions we are. I do want to just pivot a little bit and go back to the comments about Hispanic communities being more impacted. And I wanted to throw out, I guess, to Dr. Brabrand, the extent to which we are collaborating with the county, not so much to just get information, but to use our access to students and families to try to address some of those concerns. I am very curious about whether some of the same parts of our community that are being hit hard are also some of the same parts of our community that aren't necessarily accessing virtual learning right now. And I'm wondering if there is if there's a part of this that is simply we're not reaching and communicating well with particular communities. The other part that I would like to see is how we might be able to further identify these marginalized communities and groups that are being impacted, whether it's special education, whether it's particular minorities, whether it's different languages, whatever that might be, and come up with a plan, or at least at some point talk about how we plan to address that under these circumstances. So I think I'll start with that.
So thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. We're certainly working really closely with the county. I mean, tremendously with them, with the health department, with family services around the needs that we're seeing in the community with COVID-19, and it is impacting different parts of the community differently. We can continue to look, and Dr. Duran, I know, and Dr. Ivy serve on SCIP, and maybe this is one of the things we can continue to see what additional county resources can be brought to bear in those communities. Certainly the county's budget reflected additional support for the county health department. We are tracking, we have asked teachers to mark in SIS attendance. I don't know whether this was a piece of information from last week that we shared with the board, but we had one middle school where we knew out of the entire middle school there were 50 to 60 kids still not regularly accessing. And so we can go back and look at that kind of information to help us, as you've noted, in some of our highest need schools. What does our attendance look like, and what additional things can we do to grab those kids in? Or is it an access issue where we can really go back and target those families? And we'll be glad to do that.
I just wanted to say what I'm not sure.
20 seconds.
I'm looking for a one Fairfax approach, Dr. Brabrand, so that we're literally combining our resources with the county.
Understood.
Thank you, Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Dr. Anderson?
Thank you so much. I want to go back to graduation. And again, I think I want to reiterate, and I believe we are all there to let science and data be our guides in the decisions that we're making. We do know that different things are happening in different places in the Commonwealth, in Northern Virginia, but we need to be sure that we are being driven by what is happening in Fairfax, because I think our parents and our community, we deserve to feel a level of comfort and safety regarding any decision that is made. With graduation, I wanted to share that I do support the package that was offered. But my main concern is that we have consistency regarding what we do. It will be a missed opportunity for us to allow for certain communities to do certain things that others are not. Even down to the example of the car parade. I have communities where cars are not, everybody does not have one. We're expecting those folks to walk during this car parade, which will continue to highlight the inequities that exist here in Fairfax County. I want to jump very quickly into summer school because I know my time is limited. Thank you, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, for raising the question regarding hybrid models for summer school. That was also one of my questions because I do know we have those limitations regarding the use of the buildings in July. So perhaps July can be virtual and maybe a week in August can be in person. And when we have a small group, that might give us some additional data in terms of how it could look for us as we move forward. But most importantly, my point is regarding participation and access. I know that question has been raised regarding who is participating. That continues to be my primary concern because I do not want for us to lose the opportunity during summer school or ESY to engage with those communities that we have missed during these past several weeks. It is critical that we know who these students are that are at risk, that are not getting the support right now. And I'm speaking primarily about our EL students, our special needs students, so that we could be targeted in our interventions with them during these short weeks of that we can with whatever we end up doing with the ESY. So I really want to thank you.
Ms. Omesh?
Oh, Ms. Corbett Sanders, may I speak? I haven't had an opportunity yet.
Oh, well, you had said you didn't need to, but that's why I was having Ms. Omesh. But go ahead, you can speak first, and then we'll let Ms. Omesh speak.
Yeah, well, an hour ago I didn't need to, but I changed my mind. Thank you. So, you know, it's difficult for me to hear questioning of the critical health situation that we're in with our public health, and I'm really glad to have a public official here with us to make sure that we're up to date, because it certainly helps me in all the different ways that I've been trying to keep up with our health data. And I do agree, like Dr. Anderson just said, with the package that's been offered by SCAP. I think it's based on data, as far as I can see it. It's health data from our state and county. It's got inputs from students, principals, Parents, we also have the FCPTA survey, which showed that 82% of parents didn't want their children going back to school unless the state approved it as an indicator now of what we're looking at for graduation, you know, in that vein, and the equity perspective as well that Dr. Anderson spoke to. And, you know, I'm always thinking about how do we not make the perfect be the enemy of the good? And as someone who went to a big high school and loved all those traditions, I'm picturing that disappointment, but I just can't, with any good conscience, support anything that's going against the data that we're hearing. And so while I agree with looking at nearby jurisdictions for a whole host of things, I think that's a great data point of input, but I don't agree on doing what they're doing if their actions don't align with what our county data say. Other places are just not like Fairfax. Prince William might be the second largest division in Virginia, but it's got half the number of students. So I just really implore, I support the package, and I'm not going to go against what the health lead, and actually it's just breaking that our county board of supervisors chairman and the county executive have submitted a letter to the governor asking him not to move forward with the phase 1 reopening. So that's hyper local, you know, leadership requests, and that's what's got to guide us, not what is happening elsewhere in the state. I do just have one question about summer programming. I didn't hear mention of ACE programming, our adult and community ed programs. Can anyone speak to whether anything will be available through that? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you very much for that question. So we've already, well, first I should say our ACE policy basically follows the policy for our K-12 programs in the sense of if we're closed for K-12 programming, we'll close for ACE programming. That being said, we've worked really hard to already transition as many courses as possible into an online learning environment even this spring in ACE, and are continuing to do so for the summer as well. So we do continue to try to make as many virtual online options as available as possible through ACE, both in the spring and in the summer moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Marin. Ms. Omesh?
Thank you. I likewise share the idea about the hybrid, and I'm happy to have heard that, particularly for folks who may not have internet at home. Given all the questions about access, I just want to pose to staff. So where are we with the laptop situation? I've heard mixed things. You know, we made a certain order that we're expecting for the following year. Elementary school, it can't possibly be that we have enough for every elementary school kid. So I'd love to just hear an update with specificity as to where we're at on that.
Ms. Omesh, I believe they're going to address that in the back to the fall plan.
Okay. I mean, I think there are key implications for the graduation, or sorry, the summer school piece, in particular with K through 2. I think Stella mentioned this, so I just wanted to flag that. I don't know if it's worth having that conversation before we vote on this. It might be. The other piece is regarding the English language learning. I know that they're, if it's fair to say, probably one of the most efficient, if I may, groups right now and what they're receiving. I would love to hear a little bit about how we're specifically going to be addressing those gaps. I know that we were talking. You know, Dr. Presidio, thank you for outlining the plan moving forward or for potential summer opportunities, but I am really concerned about that population. And I was just running some numbers based on the public data we have on sessions, and not on a single day did we have more than an average of over 10 students per session. So just highlighting again the access, the severity of the access issues. And if we make these assumptions and move forward, you know, we're only catering to a bubble, a subset of our population. So I don't know, I mean, devoting our efforts to making sure the rest are connected seem to be equally valuable to actually providing instruction to the others. And the final thing is I have a question for on graduation. I actually hosted a call with all the senior class councils, and there was a question about customization. I don't know, Dr. Ivy, if that came up at all. I'd love to hear for each school if they have flexibility to, you know, identify other senior options. And I hear my time, so thank you.
Yes. Are you talking about customization for the videos, Ms. Omesh?
So not just specifically the videos, but broader senior activities, things that traditions that schools have that they can adapt as senior privileges. Yeah.
That's something that I'm going to be meeting with the principals tomorrow and that we have discussed in our work group. And that is what traditions, and I know they've been thinking about it, will they be able to possibly keep or do it in a different way? And each school has those unique things that they do. And so I know the principals are interested in trying to, to offer whatever they can, and we'll be working we'll be working with them to come up with ideas, and they'll be working with their students and their communities. And also we're asking that the regions help with that too.
Thank you, Dr. Ivy. Can we go ahead to Ms. Derenak Kofax?
Will we have the opportunity, Ms. Karen Corbett-Sanders, to address the laptop piece before our vote on the summer programs?
Dr. Brabrand, why don't you or Dr. Presidio give just a brief update on where we're at on the laptop piece? I don't believe it's specific to ESY, Ms. Omesh. It's broader than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, no doubt, but influences our vote, of course. Go ahead.
I can share, and Mr. Smith, I may ask Mr. Smith to provide just a bit more detail. Just a reminder that the board did vote last month for FCPS on for middle school. So we're proceeding with that to have those devices in to prepare for the fall. And we are in the fall plans we're going to show you having money to provide additional devices K through 6 that meet the gap between devices that we have in our inventory and what would be the remaining number of devices. So it would not be every kid getting a brand new device, but being able to close what we believe the inventory gap is. And Mr. Smith, if you'd like to speak or add to that, please do so.
Yeah, so in order to close that inventory gap, we would look at ordering approximately 18,000 devices to close that gap. And as we shared earlier, we would be looking at a lease option for doing so. And that would be $2.5 million over 4 years to lease those devices. So again, we would have the devices with the roll down from middle school devices going to elementary for approximately 75,000 devices, and would need to have the additional to be able to roll out to all elementary students.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Derenak Kofax?
Yes, I do want to pick up off where I left off, and it's just Dr. Presidio going back to those curriculums you've decided to leave out or felt you couldn't. I was just wondering if there was an opportunity, if we make a decision on this, could there be a later option if you say find teachers or you find some who would be able to offer some of the IFTA programs virtually online. And I say that for some, I realize you can't do robotics online. There's certain art projects you can't do online. But I do believe there are certain things such as the theater, such as the dance, certain music programs, which could have opportunities for online learning. So I'm wondering what the deadline for that might be if we were able to do that. And then I guess I just see the other one goes for the summer programs for the high schools and the challenges. I am concerned if you could just speak a little bit how you're going to address the ESOL challenges for this virtual credit recovery program. So.
Great. Thank you very much for those questions. And I'm not sure if we still have the presentation up. It's not showing on my screen. So if we don't, maybe if we could go ahead and bring that back up. But to your
we were
first
asked
question,
to take it down. We'll put it back up.
Okay, I'm sorry about that. To your first question about summer programs that we were planning to suspend, I mean, I think we could relook at that, but I mean, I have to be honest with you. We've already given it a really robust review, and it's really difficult to figure out how we would offer these programs in a virtual environment. And additionally, we're really past the timeline when we needed to make some decisions on some of these things. It takes a lot to stand these programs up. I think just the operational setup for these programs in terms of the development of the curriculum, trying to move that into an online environment would be incredibly difficult. The registration process for these programs takes quite a long time to complete, and it would be incredibly difficult. So, I mean, we could look and see if there's anything that we might be able to do, but I don't feel very optimistic that there would be, because we've been looking at this for a number of weeks and just haven't felt like we had the ability to pull that off. With respect to your questions about English language learners for high school students, I really appreciate you asking that question, because this is one of our most vulnerable student populations. So just bear with me for a second and I'll bring up some of those slides again. During credit recovery, we are going to be supporting our English 9 students and our English 10 students with additional curriculum that we'll be developing outside of the digital curriculum that we're going to be using with other students. And those students will have a curriculum that meets their language developmental needs and teacher support to be able to be successful in those courses. So those are our most vulnerable English language learners, the students at the lower levels, the lower WIDA levels of language development. So they'll get a lot of access and support. Students that are at higher language levels via online campus will also have opportunities for support. And we've been running successful programs for a number of years for those students using Title III grants in our online campus, and will continue to do so. And I do anticipate that we'll have increased enrollment in both of those programs, and we'll be doing a lot of outreach both from our ESOL teachers and from our general ed teachers to make sure that students that we've identified that potentially need some additional summer services at the high school level would get them. Because as you know, making sure that those students are earning credit towards graduation is critically important, and we cannot have those students fall behind. So we'll be working really hard to make sure that those students are identified and enrolled in the programs this summer.
Good. Yeah, that is absolutely a big concern. And I, as I said, I'm not trying to add on, but I do feel there's a missing component. You know, we have so long been so accepting of the arts curriculum, and the IFTA programs are a wonderful bridge throughout the summer. And so, I mean, respectfully, if I could ask Madam Chair for a next step, just to have a mini report of some sort to just identify to see if there's any options for that, even if we offer one such course in some kind of artistic realm, because those programs are extremely robust, and that's why I know why it seems overwhelming to do them in the same fashion. But perhaps if we could scale it down to minimalist, at least with something offered.
Thank you, Ms. Derenak Kofax. So I'm going to just add one thing very quickly, and then we'll go to trying to get consensus on what's before us. And that is, I'd like to understand how our decisions on summer school and summer programming will be impacted, and if we open up our summer SAC, and what are we doing to work with the county and the county health department on summer SAC, and how will we influence the structure of summer SAC so that it is consistent with what we do in reopening our own school programming.
So, Chairman Corbett Sanders, I do know that Mr. Smith is already working with Mary Ann Toohey on the county around summer SAC. They have a meeting planned this week. We are certainly looking at how we can stand up SAC. The CDC does have emergency child care guidelines that they published several weeks ago that we would certainly look at as the foundation for how we would stand up summer SAC. And we recognize that doing that will certainly impact how we would look into the fall, again, with conditions potentially changed. I do want you to know I've been talking daily with the county executive. And even today, the concern, as you all have already referenced, that county leadership, region leadership just this weekend shared that the data says that the governor's reopening plan may not work for Northern Virginia. I believe, I don't speak for the county executive or the county, but I think they, like we are today, looking at summer through a more virtual lens than face-to-face. But we will follow up on the SAC and keep you guys updated, as it would, of course, have students in our schools. And we would be doing everything we could to keep those students as safe as possible and the staff that serve them.
So, Dr. Brabrand, thank you for that. Along those lines, the reason I raised summer SAC is because of the comments my colleagues have made about putting forth some sort of hybrid model for especially our ESY and PAC kids. And we know that those classrooms tend to be lower in numbers, and so it may be easier to look at social distancing in those areas. And what I will ask for you, maybe as a next step, is that when we look at August timeframe for the ESY, that we might look at a hybrid if we have a return to our buildings through summer SAC.
So what I would say to you is we certainly can, as a follow-up, as you just said, look about, have our virtual programs, monitor who's coming and who's not, and to the degree possible, if there's something where in August, we believe, again, as we approach the return to school for the fall, but in August, if we can do something early for some of those kids, we could certainly look at it. We'll have to balance all of the considerations of safety, all of the budget considerations. We can certainly put that as a look for our recommendation today. Again, we've given you two choices. We can do August face-to-face if the board wants to vote on that today. But our recommendation is to do the virtual now, what's guaranteed, what we know we can do, and then address this key issue the board has raised about kids who may not get a chance to access it virtually, and then potentially for maybe some kids who could get that double dip even after the virtual's done. And we can look at that and talk to you about that at a later date.
Okay. Thank you. So with that, if you could put the decisions up on the screen to come to a decision today. I would like to decouple the consensus on the graduation so that we look at step 1 and 2 first. Who can support the virtual graduation celebration videos at the school level, as well as facilitating and encouraging all of our students to come and get a picture and pick up their diplomas in small groups.
Madam Chair, may I just ask a question for clarification?
Sure, Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
So I recall you saying you were decoupling these things. Are you suggesting that we make a separate decision about possible graduations in the future?
Fall. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
That's exactly what we're doing. So those who can support the first two, please show hands. So I have Miss Marin, Miss McLaughlin, Mr. Frisch, Miss Sizemore-Heiser, Dr. Anderson, Miss Tolan, Miss Omesh, Miss Keys-Gamarra, Miss Derenak-Kofax, Miss Cohen, Miss Karski, and Miss Corbett-Sanders. Those opposed? Everybody put your hands down that have already had them up. Miss Sizemore-Heiser, you're opposed? So I don't see any opposition. Those abstaining? Now, the second one is the decision regarding a in-person graduation. Depending on the health conditions, we would ideally like to see that in the fall, but we would not preclude a winter or later date. All those who could support that approach, that would be that it's not a firm decision on Labor Day. I have Ms. Frisch, or Mr. Frisch, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Marin, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Omesh, Dr. Anderson, Ms. Tola, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Derenak Kofax, Ms. Pekarsky, and Ms. Corbett Sanders. Those opposed? Those abstaining? Okay, that motion carries, which means that we will ideally have a graduation in the fall, but we could postpone it if health conditions are such.
Ms. Corbett Sanders, I have a question.
Yes, Ms. McLaughlin.
So Dr. Brabrand was referencing Labor Day. Is it that he's saying to the board and saying to the public that even if we do consider a graduation, a live graduation opportunity in the fall or later, he wants to definitively make a decision no later than Labor Day, regardless?
The decision we just voted on does not lock in Labor Day as the decision date.
Good. All right. I just wanted to make sure that was the case.
That is the case. Thank you, Ms. McLaughlin, for the clarity.
So, Ms. Corbett Sanders, I had one other question also. We had talked at one point of.
Is that Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Yes.
Okay, because Ms. Marin had her hand up. Can I take her first? Ms. Marin?
Thank you. Yes, I also just want really super clear clarity about the vote we just took. So we're approving the plan today, but we are also saying that if it's an option to do in person in the fall over Labor Day, that we will support that.
Yes, that Dr. Brabrand will check in with us around Labor Day initially, depending on the health concerns, and make a recommendation on whether we can do it in the fall or if we would do it later, depending on the health conditions.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Just very briefly, I thought the staff was going to look into options of like car parades and things like that. Is that something they're going to come back to us with as something we could add if obviously it's safe and feasible?
Would you like to put that on the option? I think that what Dr. Ivy said was that they leave most of that up to the local level because they've been put on by the PTAs, but Dr. Anderson raised concern over equity in that if we prescribe something that certain areas would be able to take part and maybe others wouldn't.
Yeah, when I had brought it up initially, the conversation I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, was that Dr. Ivy was going to look into feasibility as a consistency and then get back to us on it. That they hadn't really
looked. That would be a next step, and we can certainly put that on next steps.
Okay.
Ms. Corbett Sanders, can I add to that as well,
please? Ms. Kamara, could I let Ms. Derenak Kofax and Dr. Anderson speak, and then you could speak since they have their hands up. Thank you. Ms. Derenak Kofax?
Yes, I guess I want to hear from Dr. Ivy again before I would agree to a next step. I mean, I know anybody can put a next step out, but whether I want to support it. I want to hear from Dr. Ivy, and I know Dr. Pamela Brumfield is on this call as a principal that was on that group. I want to understand what your conversations were around, short of what your recommendations were. What were they with the continuity? I understand the preserving of traditions. I understand that, but when you talk, there's preserving of traditions and what has to be done perhaps for safety virtually versus some of the other things that were mentioned. And Dr. Ivy, you seem to say, well, that's a PTA function, almost like we can't control it. Do we need to be able to control that as a board? What can we do, and what has your committee looked at in order to provide a one Fairfax approach to the majority of things while preserving traditions?
So I will start, and then I'm going to ask the three principals that are on in the meeting to also comment, and also Mr. Smith, because he had some clear comments, particularly around the police, getting input from the police. I will say that we talked about car parades slightly, but not in great depth. And we were trying to focus on options that were the most safe and that would be school sponsored. Most of the principals were not in support of car parades because of the logistics of it, the number of cars, just the physical layout of the of their campuses, and so that was something that we were not going to support as a school school supported event. With that said, there are parents who have decided or are organizing in some of our communities that they have a car parade. And
that's currently happening, Dr. Ivy, currently.
I do believe so. And our principals, if you know of information, if you could share it.
Hi, this is Pamela Brumfield again. And so in reference to having car parades, I think the general thought from principals is that we really do look at having equitable experiences for students. In my school community, I have many, many parents who do not have cars. So for me to have an activity and to sponsor an activity in which I know many of my families could not participate, that's really quite unfair. So the car parades are not something that we feel would be school sponsored or that the schools or principals would endorse. We wanted to come together and create fair, equitable graduation celebration experiences that would be inclusive, that would include all of our kids. We felt that a virtual video would include all of our kids. We would do our very best making sure that all kids participate. Obviously, a child could decide to opt out, but we could get students with disabilities. Everyone would be able to have their time in that video. We also thought that the photo op would be something that most students would participate, and that would be equitable as well. And these were things that we thought all students in Fairfax County would have this kind of graduation celebration. When you get into the car parades or you get into the drive-in movie idea, they're great. Some of the school districts that are doing that, they're very small. There's some school districts in this country that have one high school. So it's easy, or two, it's easy for them to facilitate that. But when we think about the number of high schools we have in Fairfax County, 25 to 30, and the number of cars, we didn't even know where we could facilitate that. And again, the assumption is that all parents have the means or the vehicle to participate in that kind of activity. So I think there was, I don't want to call out schools, but maybe a Woodson or another school where parents did want to organize a car parade. But again, that's not going to include everyone in their community. It is going to exclude some students. So I don't know of anyone that has occurred yet. But again, I think most parents were waiting for what we were going to do as a school system. I think people were kind of going to take things in their own hands because no decisions had been made from Fairfax County. We're hopeful that once we come out with what we are doing, that it will let people know what the plans are, and then there will be more partnership between the school and the parent community. But I think it was really because no one was hearing anything. And so parents kind of got anxious and said that they wanted to kind of take things into their own hands.
Thank you, Ms. Brumfield. Dr. Anderson and Ms. Keys-Gamarra, and then we're going to stop this portion of the conversation and go to the next piece.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Corbett-Sanders. And thank you so much, Dr. Brumfield, for what you've just shared. It really emphasizes what I've been trying to communicate. I would be unwilling to agree to this as a next step because I already know it will exclude a great number of our community from participating. And for me, that is not one Fairfax, that is not equity. So thank you for those statements.
Thank you. Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
Yes, I thought during the discussion when I raised concerns, and perhaps I misunderstood Dr. Ivy, but I suggested that we develop a list of safe options that high schools could practice. I wasn't necessarily referring to the parade because I certainly understand that and agree with that. But I thought that one of the concerns I had to do with the removal of choice. And so if there are some choices that schools can make that are inclusive, but still helps the community to feel as though they have had a greater input, I just wanted to see if that was feasible. And I thought Dr. Ivy responded well to what I said, but now I'm not so sure.
So if I could just respond, that is something that I will be working with the principals to come up with that list and for them to share ideas. But the car parades would not be one of those options.
Thank you. And we do have next steps, folks. So we will go to them in a moment. I just wanted to focus on getting these two decision points, do the next steps, and recognize at this point, we have spent 3.5 hours almost on the first couple of decisions, and we do have another significant portion of this work session. So with that, if we could go to the second decision we have to make, and that is regarding the summer programming and consensus on the recommendations surrounding summer programming. Dr. Brabrand, are we able to add to this summer programming what I just mentioned, which is that we would look at some in-person in August for the ESY and PAC programs if it becomes safe?
So what I suggest here is to support our recommendation for the virtual, and as a next step to look at this issue of whether we could complement virtual with any face-to-face in August, looking at budgets, looking at the health data when we get to what I would say is middle to late July. Again, I'll have to work with staff to backdate how far in advance we would have to plan for that early August intervention.
So if you could provide us that at a later date as part of the next step, that would be great. So if I could have a consensus from the board on who can support the recommendations for the summer programs. Please show your hands. So I have Dr. Anderson, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. Marin, Ms. Omesh, Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Tolan, Ms. Cohen, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Pekarsky, Mr. Frisch, Ms. Derenak Kofax, and Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Those opposed?
That was 12, Madam Chair. That was unanimous.
Excellent. Thank you very much. It's hard for me to, I'm operating without being able to see all the numbers. Thank you very much. So that passes as well. Could you please put the next steps up, Ms. Mulberg? And ladies and gentlemen, you will have to use your own screens to enlarge on your screen if you can't see it well.
Madam Chair, do you want to start taking a consensus on each one?
That's what I'm about to do, but I wanted people to go ahead and read it. You can delete, can delete item 321 since we've already done that. And if we can kind of group some of these items, there's quite a bit in the health piece. Okay, I have a number of people with questions or statements, and I do want to remind people it's 4:22. Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
Yes, ma'am.
So
the language is fine if it's okay to my colleagues.
Okay, that's your language. You're fine with it. Okay?
Yes.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Yeah, I just have a concern with 315 on the Naval Academy. I mean, that's just one consideration. I know the University of Virginia is planning to hold a live graduation in the fall. I wouldn't want it limited to simply what the Naval Academy did.
Yeah, just modify it to read, since it's your next step, you asked for it, whether you would like it to say how universities are doing.
Universities and other Washington area school districts are planning to do it in the fall.
Okay, great.
But I also did not notice anything in there about, and maybe it just goes to getting the public health department to come in and talk about our COVID data per capita, because
Ms. McLaughlin, it is listed as ask the health department to provide us with a briefing and talk to us. That's perfect. One of the Ms.
Can we return the slide? I'm so sorry, I've lost it.
That's what I was just about to ask. Ms. Mulberg, can you put it back up on the screen, please? Excellent, thank you. Ms. Sizemore-Heiser?
Thank you. On number 314, I had mentioned that as an option, as well as other virtual celebrations. Like I think I said town halls, I think Ms. Keys-Gamarra called them parties, which are both fine, but it's other ways of celebrating. So the car parades were just one option I had mentioned, but other safe ways to celebrate, whether virtually or in person. So if we could change that to say, check with the health department or develop more varied ways of celebrations that are safe, including virtual parties or gatherings, awards.
Okay.
And then there was another one I had that I can't see on the screen now. I think it's lower. It might have been 323 or 324.
Ms. Mulberg, can you, thank you.
Yeah, for 323, if it could be better support ESY, including hybrid options.
Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, do you want to just take 323 and 327 where we have guidance being created for SAC that could influence our ability for ESY? Combine the two.
I mean, sure, we can do that. I mean, it's
because that will drive, if the county opens up the summer SAC is what I'm talking about, then that should open up opportunities for us.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They're 2 points, they're related, so
yeah,
we can combine those two.
So if we would add those two together. Thank you. Ms. Derenak-Kofax?
I couldn't see my next step, but it's there. And I would just put IFTA in front of summer programming because that's the programming model that we're using, just not summer programming. IFTA, summer programming.
Thank you. Dr. Anderson?
I lost the slide again, but I wanted to confirm that mine was appropriately written, but I also want to express my additional concern. I believe it's number 314. I am not going to be able to support a corporate option. So I'm not looking for that particularly as a next step, but that is just the opinion of one.
I'd like to see that one rewritten because that's what I was hoping to have.
So that's the one Ms. Sizemore-Heiser suggested a number of virtual celebration options, virtual or
and yeah, other. Depending on what, yeah, virtual or other, but not just, but something that's inclusive.
Madam Chair,
I'm so sorry. Is the cup parade still part of 314 or is no longer part of 314?
I mean, I like it to be looked into as something to ask them about, but I think it's varied ways to include virtual and in person. I don't necessarily, it has to be a car parade, but
it's
something that
a menu of opportunities.
Yeah.
Would your concern
Madam
be
Chair, isn't that the same as mine? 317, identifying safe, is it 317? Safe choices, isn't that what we're talking about?
I would
ladies,
I like some local controls. That way it's more consistent across the county, was I think the biggest difference.
Right. So what I would suggest is maybe combining 314 and 317 and adding the language about ensuring consistency and equity or inclusivity.
That would be fine with me.
Ms. Keys-Gamarra?
Well, I'm not, I think that the RASs can make a decision about equity, you know, within their districts. But everybody may not want to do the same thing. So I guess that's kind of where I grapple with that language a little bit.
I don't necessarily think it's a bad idea to have both options looked into, whether it's sort of the variety, what I mentioned is a variety of ways for celebration that can be given to the entire county, and then Ms. Keys-Gamarra looking at ways to have more local options. I'm not sure. I think those might be related, but not the same. So having both separated out as options, I think may be a good idea.
Okay. So folks, we are at that point where if people feel comfortable with this, what I'd like is a show of hands of who can support the next steps as written, rather than as having to go through each and every one of them. Combining 314 and 317.
Madam Chair, I need to see them again. They're not up there because I'm not sure I can support.
Okay. Do you want me to go through each one? This will take us an hour, folks, and I don't know where we're going to get the time.
I don't want you to, but I guess if you don't support one, you're not going to support the next step. So that's fine. I want that to be known out there. I think that's important.
So is there one in particular you don't support, Ms. Derenak-Kofax? We will pull out the ones that people have concerns over.
I'm looking to see how 314 and 317 were combined or not at this point. Okay, let me see.
Also for 317, the original ask was about a communications plan, a timeline, to share a timeline of that. So that may not be captured if they're combined.
No. 317 is a new 317. That's a community. The 314 and 317 that were combined, Ms. Omesh, were regarding the menu of options to be provided.
Right. Okay. Sorry, my mistake. Thank you.
I can support 314 as written now.
I can as well.
So based on that, ladies and gentlemen, can I suggest that we have everybody show hands whether they can support the full, all of the next steps? Then I'm going to say take a 5-minute break and we will reconvene for the next part of this session. So I have Ms. McLaughlin, Ms. Sizemore-Heiser, Ms. Omesh, Ms. Pekarsky, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. Tolan, Dr. Anderson, Ms. Cohen, and Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Those opposed? Oh, I've got Ms. Derenak-Kofax joining. Are you Ms. Derenak-Kofax, Ms. Marin have also voted in support of the next step?
No, I have not. I'm going to say I'm opposed at this point. Okay.
Me as well.
But it's more because of two of them, but one of them. But because I feel like we haven't had the opportunity to discuss it thoroughly. So on the record, I support mostly all of them except the one, even though it says equity. I do think as once we start getting into local control, you start getting into the two Fairfaxes. And since we really don't have time to discuss that, that's the reason I'm not supporting them, because I just feel like there's just not enough time for me to say yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Marin?
Yeah, I'm not supporting because staff has already done the work of getting data together. And I think asking for more and more data is not an efficient use of time, and we need to make a decision. We've been given solid presentations. So.
Thank you. And Ms. McLaughlin, are you in opposition?
No, we voted, and this is just to get information for future decision making. I'm in support of the next steps and move on.
Thank you. Mr. Frisch, I didn't see your hand go up. Are you abstaining? You must have stepped away. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to suggest a 5-minute break or a 7-minute break, and we will reconvene at 4:40 for the rest of this presentation.